He gave her seat away, not to an elderly woman, not to someone in pain, to his 24-year-old intern, the one who called him mentor in that soft, breathless way that made Margaret Calloway's stomach turn every time she heard it. And when Margaret arrived 3 minutes late, still catching her breath from the parking garage, her carry-on hitting the back of her heels, she found Danielle already settled into 14A, her seat. The window seat Margaret had booked 4 months ago, while Richard stood in the aisle, looking at his phone like he was checking the weather. He didn't even glance up when she stopped in front of him. "There's a middle seat in the back," he said. Just like that. If you have ever stood in a moment so quiet that you could actually hear your own life breaking, this story is for you. And if you think boarding a plane is where this ends, you have absolutely no idea what's coming. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because every week we bring you stories that will shake you, move you, and make you grateful for the life you're living. Drop your city or country in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if someone you love needs to hear this today, share it with them. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Margaret Calloway was 51 years old, and she had spent the better part of those years being sensible. Not because she lacked passion, not because she was afraid of her own feelings, but because she had grown up in a house where sensible was the only currency that held value, where her mother paid bills first and cried later, always later, usually in the bathroom, with the fan running so nobody would hear. Margaret had absorbed that lesson, the way children absorb the things they watch most, quietly, completely, without ever being formally taught. She was the kind of woman who renewed her insurance before it lapsed, who kept her car maintained on schedule, who remembered birthdays and sent actual cards, not text messages, because she believed that the extra effort was a small way of telling people they mattered. She had built a career as a hospital administrator over 23 years at Mercy General in Columbus, Ohio. Not glamorous work, not the kind of thing that landed you on a magazine cover, but the kind of work that held a building together. She was the one who knew which supply vendors could be trusted and which ones padded their invoices. She was the one the nursing staff called when something went wrong at 2 in the morning. She was, in the language of every performance review she had ever received, indispensable. She had also, for the last 4 years, been engaged to Richard Holt. Richard was 54. He ran the strategies division of a mid-sized consulting firm, and he had the particular kind of confidence that comes from spending decades in rooms where everyone else deferred to you. He was tall, well-dressed in the specific way of men who have learned that appearance is a tool, and he could be charming in the particular way that charming men are charming selectively, deliberately, in ways that made you feel like the most interesting person in the world when the charm was aimed at you, and slightly invisible when it was aimed elsewhere. Margaret had known this about him. She wasn't a woman who missed things. She had simply decided, at 47, that the particular warmth he showed her in the first year of their relationship was the real version of him, and that everything else was the armor he wore in professional spaces. She had decided to love the man underneath the armor, and she had committed to that decisions with the same thorough competence she brought to everything else in her life. She had not expected to be wrong, but she had learned, recently and against her will, that even sensible women can make sensible-seeming mistakes. The trip to Phoenix was Richard's idea. His firm had a 3-day conference presentations, networking dinners, the kind of event he attended 4 times a year and usually attended alone. But this year he had suggested she come. "It'll be good for us," he had said, sitting across from her at the kitchen table in the house they shared. "We've been ships passing lately, and Phoenix in October is actually beautiful." She had agreed because she thought he was right. They had been ships passing. 2 people sharing a mortgage and a refrigerator, and the occasional Sunday morning, but not the kind of closeness that had characterized the early years. She had attributed this to stress. His work had been demanding, her hospital had gone through a difficult restructuring, and she believed, with the pragmatic optimism of a woman who had chosen him deliberately, that a few days in the same city with nothing urgent on the calendar would help. She had booked 14A 4 months in advance. the window seat, which she preferred because she liked to look out during takeoff, and she always brought a book, and she was genuinely a person who planned things in advance and stuck to the plan. She had confirmed the booking twice. The morning of the flight, she had packed carefully, arrived at the airport in time, moved through security with the practiced efficiency of a frequent flyer, and stopped at a newsstand to buy a water bottle and the kind of peanut butter crackers she ate on planes because they kept her from getting the particular lightheadedness that came from skipping breakfast in the rush of travel. She was 3 minutes late to the gate. 3 minutes. Kind of delay produced by a security line that moved more slowly than expected, not carelessness, not negligence, just the ordinary friction of a busy airport on a Thursday morning in October. Richard had been at the gate on time. She knew this because he had texted her, "Boarding now. Where are you?" She had texted back, "2 minutes, go ahead, I'll find you." She did not expect to find him in the aisle, watching someone else settle into her seat. The person in 14A had honey blonde hair, the particular luminous skin of someone in their mid-20s, and was in the process of sliding her bag into the overhead bin with the comfortable ease of a person who fully expected to be staying where she was. Her name was Danielle Marsh. She was 24 years old, had been working as a junior analyst in Richard's division for 8 months, and had, over the course of those 8 months, developed the habit of appearing in photographs from work events that Richard mentioned in passing, and then, when Margaret looked him up on the company's social media, that she found standing very close to him. Margaret had noticed. Margaret always noticed. She had also told herself that she was being the kind of jealous that came from too much time reading bad news online, and she had put the photographs in the locked compartment where she kept things that were not helping her and moved on. She was not moving on right now. She was standing in the aisle of a Boeing 737 at 9:14 in the morning with her carry-on, hitting the back of her heels, looking at Richard, who was looking at his phone. "There's a middle seat in the back," he said, still not looking up. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked up then. Something moved through his expression, not guilt, which would have required acknowledging that there was something to feel guilty about, but the specific irritation of a man who has made a decision he considers reasonable and is not expecting to be questioned about it. "Danielle had a rough flight in from Chicago last night," he said. "She needed the window. I figured you wouldn't mind." Margaret looked at him. She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at vendor invoices that didn't add up, not with anger yet, but with the flat, careful attention of a person trying to locate the exact place where something went wrong. "You figured I wouldn't mind," she said. "She gets motion sickness." "Richard." Her voice was very level. She had a gift for level. "I booked that seat 4 months ago. I know. I'll get you miles for it." He said it with the particular patience of a man, explaining something to someone who is being unreasonable, and then he turned back to his phone, and in the row ahead of them, Danielle tucked herself against the window and pulled out her AirPods and didn't look at Margaret at all, which was somehow the detail that landed hardest, the complete absence of acknowledgement, as if Margaret were not a person in the aisle, but a small inconvenience that had already been accounted for and set aside. Margaret stood there for exactly 7 seconds. She counted them. She didn't mean to, but she did 1, 2, 3, 4 the way you count through something, when some part of your brain is still trying to run the math on a situation that doesn't add up. Then she picked up her carry-on. She turned around. She walked back up the jet bridge. Behind her, she heard Richard say her name. Once, with the slightly elevated irritation of someone who expected compliance and was encountering resistance. She did not stop. She did not turn around. She walked through the gate, back into the terminal, and she stood on the other side of the door for a moment, with her carry-on handle in her hand, and her heart doing something. She couldn't quite characterize not quite pounding, not quite braking. More like running the way an engine runs when you've put the wrong fuel in it. She took out her phone. She called her best friend Linda, who was in Cincinnati, and would be awake because Linda was always awake early and always answered. Linda picked up on the second ring. "Hey, how's the flight?" "I got off the plane," Margaret said. A beat of silence. "You what?" He gave my seat to Danielle. She said it plainly, the way she said most things. The intern. He said she gets motion sickness, another beat. Longer this time. Where are you right now? The terminal. Columbus. I'm still at the gate, and he's on the plane. A pause. I assume. Unless he got off too. She hadn't thought about that until this moment. She looked behind her at the jet bridge door. It was still closed. He didn't get off. She heard Linda exhale, long and slow, the exhale of someone processing several things at once. Linda had known Margaret for 31 years. They had met in a statistics class in college, bonded over the shared misery of a professor who spoke as though English were a language he had recently been introduced to, and had been the kind of friends who didn't need to talk every day to remain essential to each other. Linda also had, over the past 18 months, said things about Richard that Margaret had not been ready to hear. Careful things. The kind of carefully phrased concerns that a good friend offers when she's worried but doesn't want to push. Margaret had not been ready. She was starting to wonder about that. Okay, Linda said. What do you need right now? I don't know, Margaret said honestly. I got off the plane, and now I'm standing in the Columbus airport at 9:15 in the morning with nowhere to go. Do you want to come here? As she stopped. Cincinnati was 3 hours by car. She had nowhere to be today. She had taken the week off for the Phoenix trip, which meant she had no patients to manage, no files to review, no reason that required her to be anywhere specific. The absence of that structure felt strange, not freeing, exactly, but unmoored. Like standing on a boat that was no longer tied to the dock. Maybe. I'll make the guest room up, Linda said, which was the Linda equivalent of a hug. I don't want to. You're not imposing. You know you're not imposing. A pause. Maggie. That name. Linda was one of exactly 3 people who called her Maggie, the others being her sister Donna and her mother, who had died 6 years ago. The sound of it, in this particular terminal, on this particular morning, did something to her chest. Just drive here, Linda said. We'll figure out the rest. Her phone buzzed while she was still on with Linda. Richard. She glanced at the screen, let it go to voicemail, and kept walking toward the parking garage. He called again when she was retrieving her car. She answered that time. Not because she was ready to talk, but because she was a person who dealt with things rather than avoided them, and she understood that not answering was its own kind of decision, one that would produce its own kind of consequences. What are you doing? He said, driving out of the parking garage. A pause. The plane is still at the gate. You can come back. I'm not coming back. Margaret. The patience in his voice had shifted into something more pressured. You're being, what am I being? Dramatic, he said. She stopped at the parking garage exit. The arm was down. She sat with her car idling and her hands on the wheel, and Richard's voice in her ear saying the word dramatic with the specific inflection of a man who had used that word before, to describe other moments, to reframe other situations in ways that had always made her wonder, slightly, whether she was overreacting. I booked that seat 4 months ago, she said, and I explained. You didn't explain. You told me, after the fact. You gave my seat to a 24-year-old who works for you, and when I showed up, you told me to go sit in the back, and then you went back to your phone. Silence. She was uncomfortable, he said. I was inconvenienced, Margaret said. Those aren't the same weight, Richard. Not to me. You're going to throw a 4-day trip because of a seat assignment? I'm not throwing anything. She pulled forward as the exit arm lifted. I just got off the plane. Come back. I'm already on the highway. This was not quite true. She was at the exit of the parking garage, not on the highway, but the principle of it was accurate. She was leaving. She could feel it in her chest, the sensation of a decision that was larger than its immediate surface, that contained something underneath it she hadn't fully excavated yet. If you don't come back, Richard said, and his voice had gone to a place she recognized the low, controlled register of a man making a point he expects to land. We're going to have a conversation when I get home that I don't think either of us wants to have. She thought about that for exactly 1 moment. Okay, she said. And she hung up. She drove to Cincinnati with the radio off. It was a thing she did when she needed to think, clearly removed all the ambient noise and let the road do what roads did. which was give her hands something to do, and her eyes something to track while her brain worked through what was actually happening. What was actually happening was this: a seat on a plane was not the point. She had known this before she left the airport. In the flat, calm way, she sometimes knew things before she had fully articulated them to herself. The seat was the moment when something that had been accumulating quietly became visible. The seat was the invoice that didn't add up. She had been in this relationship for 4 years. She had been in this relationship with her eyes open, or so she had believed. She had watched Richard in professional settings and observed the way he moved through rooms, always toward the person most likely to be useful, always with the specific warmth that was really a kind of assessment. She had watched him at family dinners, at her hospital's fundraising events, at the quiet Saturday mornings that were supposed to be theirs. She had watched all of it and had made a consistent series of choices to interpret it generously. Richard was tired. Richard was stressed. Richard valued efficiency over warmth, and it wasn't personal, it was just his way. Richard showed love differently than she did, and part of adult partnership was learning to speak each other's language. She had made those allowances. She had been patient in the way that sensible women are patient, not because they lack self-respect, but because they believe that commitment means something, that relationships are not disposable, that the work of loving someone imperfect is the actual work of love. She also knew somewhere in the part of herself she kept in the same locked compartment as those photographs, that she had been making those allowances more frequently and with more effort over the last 18 months. That the good version of Richard, the version she had chosen, required an increasing amount of infrastructure to sustain. That she was tired in a way she hadn't been in the beginning. She hadn't wanted to look at that directly. Looking at it directly required deciding what to do about it, and deciding meant changing, and changing meant losing the version of her life that she had built and planned for, and was, in every practical respect, reasonable. She wasn't someone who made unreasonable decisions. She reached Linda's house at 12:40 in the afternoon. Linda met her at the door in jeans and a flannel shirt, already holding a cup of tea. She handed it to Margaret without preamble, looked at her face, and said, "Come inside." The guest room was made up, as promised. There were fresh towels on the bed. On the small table by the window, Linda had left a paperback and a bag of Margaret's favorite dark chocolate-covered almonds, the expensive ones from the shop downtown, that Linda always said were overpriced and bought anyway for special occasions. This qualified, apparently. Margaret sat on the edge of the guest bed and held her tea with both hands and looked at the wall and let herself be somewhere quiet for a few minutes. Linda sat in the chair in the corner and didn't talk, which was one of the things Margaret had always loved about her, the understanding that some moments needed space before they needed words. Richard texted at 1 p.m., "We need to talk when I land." She did not respond. He texted again at 3. "I hope you've had time to think about how you handled this morning." She looked at that one for a long moment. The specific phrasing of it. How you handled this morning. Not what happened this morning. Not even what I did, but how she had handled it, as though the problem were her response rather than the thing she was responding to. She showed it to Linda. Linda read it, looked at Margaret, said nothing. "I know," Margaret said. "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." Linda set the phone down on the arm of the chair between them. "I've been about to say things for 1.5 years," she said. "I figured you'd get here when you got here. I don't know if I'm here yet. You got off the plane, Maggie." "I got off the plane because I was angry about a seat." "You got off the plane," Linda said, with the deliberate patience of someone making a distinction, because something finally happened that was too visible to reframe. She paused. The seat wasn't new. The behavior was just finally public enough that you couldn't talk yourself out of it. Margaret looked at her tea. "I've been talking myself out of it," she said. "I know, for a long time, I know." "I bought a dress," Margaret said. It came out slightly sideways, not the thing she meant to say next, but the thing that arrived. "For the wedding. 3 months ago. It's hanging in the closet at home. Ivory. Which I almost didn't get because I thought at 51 it was maybe not." She stopped. "But the woman at the boutique said it looked exactly right, and I thought she might just be saying it. But then I looked in the mirror and I thought, She stopped again. Linda was watching her with the careful, steady attention of a person who knows that the thing being said right now is the thing that actually matters, and that interrupting it would be the wrong instinct. I thought I was happy, Margaret said, quietly, not perfectly happy. I knew we had things to work on, but I thought the general shape of it was I thought I was making a good choice. Maybe you were, Linda said, when you made it. And now? Linda picked up her own tea. Took a moment. I think you know more now than you did then. And I think you have to decide what to do with what you know. Margaret did not answer. She sat in the guest bedroom in Cincinnati at 3:15 on a Thursday afternoon, with the dark chocolate almonds on the table, and the paperback she wasn't going to read, and she let what she knew sit beside her without rushing it toward a conclusion. Her phone lit up again. Not Richard this time. Danielle. She stared at the name on the screen for a moment, with the particular quality of someone encountering a variable they hadn't accounted for. Then she answered, Mrs. Calloway. Danielle's voice was careful, slightly rehearsed, the way voices sound when a person has planned what they're going to say and is executing the plan. I wanted to call because I feel bad about this morning. Margaret waited. Richard told me you'd given me permission to have the window seat. He said you preferred the aisle, actually, and that you'd switched. I didn't know you'd pause. I didn't know you didn't know. The guest room was very quiet. He told you I gave you permission, Margaret said. Yes. He said you two had talked about it last night, and you'd suggested it. She and Richard had not talked about it last night. Last night they had ordered Chinese takeout and watched 40 minutes of a documentary about national parks before Richard fell asleep on the couch and Margaret had moved to bed and read for an hour. They had exchanged approximately 90 words, none of which had involved seat assignments. I see, Margaret said. I'm sorry if I caused... You didn't cause anything, Danielle. She said it with the same level quality she used for everything. Thank you for calling. She ended the call. She sat with that for a long moment. The particular, precise shape of it. Richard had not simply given her seat away in a thoughtless moment of misplaced generosity. He had lied to Danielle. He had constructed a version of the situation in which Margaret had agreed, in which her comfort had been consulted and offered, and the decision had been mutual. Which meant he had planned it, at least a little. Which meant he had known she might not agree. Which meant he had simply decided for her, preemptively, and then constructed a story that made the decision look like her own. She thought about the performance review files she reviewed every year. The ones where employees had misrepresented processes, made decisions outside their authority, and then filed documentation that made the decisions look authorized. She thought about what she did with those files. She thought about the dress in the closet at home. Ivory, the woman at the boutique saying it looked exactly right. She looked at Linda. He lied to her, Margaret said. Linda was very still. He told Danielle I'd agreed to the seat swap. He told her we'd discussed it. She set her tea down. We didn't discuss it. He invented my consent. Linda set her own tea down. Maggie, she said, how long has he been making decisions on your behalf and telling you about them after the fact? It was the right question. It was the question that had been waiting on the other side of the morning's events, patient and specific, for Margaret to arrive here and be ready to hear it. She thought about the engagement party Richard had planned without consulting her, the guest list assembled from his professional contacts, the venue she wouldn't have chosen, the date that conflicted with her sister's anniversary weekend, all presented as done deals she could be gracious about or difficult about, but not change. She thought about the vacation he had booked 2 springs ago to a resort she'd mentioned only in passing, as something nice to look at online, booked without discussing it, presented as a gift, which it was, in a way, except that she hadn't been consulted on the timing, which had meant moving 3 work commitments and letting down a colleague who had been counting on her for a conference presentation. She thought about smaller things, dinners with his friends that she'd found out about the day of, commitments made in her name, schedules adjusted on her behalf. She thought about how many of these things she had absorbed and reframed and filed away because they were individually small, and because the larger version of Richard, the version she had built her future around, had felt worth the small accommodations. She had never added them up before. Not out loud. Not like this. She sat in Linda's guest room and added them up. When she finished, she looked at the window. Outside, the October afternoon was doing something unremarkable, the kind of gray. Ordinary sky that a Thursday in Cincinnati produced without apology, and she thought about a dress in an ivory closet in Columbus, and a plane that was probably somewhere over Tennessee by now, carrying a man who had decided who she was in relation to his life a long time ago, and had been operating from that decision with the particular certainty of someone who had never considered being wrong. She picked up her phone. She called her sister Donna. Donna answered on the fourth ring. Slightly out of breath. She was always slightly out of breath. Always in the middle of something. 3 kids and a job and a husband and a house that perpetually needed something. Hey, what's up? I've got like 10 minutes before. I think I'm ending the engagement, Margaret said. Silence, Donna. I'm here. Her sister's voice had shifted. The out-of-breath quality had dropped away, replaced by something focused and still. I'm here. Tell me. So she told her. All of it. The seat and Danielle's phone call and the list she'd just assembled in her head. Donna listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Donna, who had opinions about everything and delivered them freely, often simultaneously with whoever was talking. She didn't interrupt once. When Margaret finished, there was a pause. The dress is at the cleaners, Donna said. What? Your dress? I picked it up for you 2 weeks ago. I had a key, so I grabbed it when I was in Columbus for Mom's thing, the memorial lunch. I figured you might want it there, rather than the closet, when you got back from Phoenix. I was going to surprise you. A pause. It's in closet. Margaret looked at the ceiling. There was something almost absurd about it, the dress in Donna's closet, instead of her own, the ivory thing she had bought for a future she was currently reconsidering in a guest room in Cincinnati. Something almost farcical, if farce was what happened when a life reorganized itself faster than the objects in it could keep up. Okay, she said, Maggie. Donna's voice was the voice of her younger sister, who had driven her to the airport the day she moved to Columbus for her first job, who had sat with her at their mother's bedside in those last weeks, who had never once, in all those years, been anything other than completely on her side. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. You know that. I know that. And if you decide to end it, a pause. He's going to say you overreacted. I know. He's going to say it was a seat, and you turned it into something it wasn't. I know. And I need you to be clear in your own head about what it actually was, Donna said. Not for him, for you. Because if you're not clear, you're going to second-guess yourself every time he makes the case. Margaret thought about the list. The long, specific, accumulated list that she had spent 4 years building without ever laying it flat enough to see the whole shape. I'm clear, she said, and that was the thing she had not expected from this morning. Not the anger, which had been present but controlled, and not the grief, which was there too, waiting its turn, and not even the exhaustion of arriving at a conclusion she had been circling for 18 months. What she had not expected was the clarity, the particular, cold, uncomplicated clarity of a woman who has finally added up a column of numbers she has been keeping in her head and found the total. She stayed at Linda's that night. In the evening, Linda made pasta, and they sat at the kitchen table and talked about other things. Linda's daughter, who was applying to colleges, the neighbor's dog that had been in an ongoing dispute with Linda's garden, and the conversation did what good conversation with old friends does, which was hold them in the present without requiring them to solve everything at once. Richard called twice more that evening. She let them both go to voicemail. She was not ready to have the conversation by phone. Some conversations needed a room, needed the particular gravity of 2 people in the same physical space, where there was nowhere to hang up, nowhere to walk out of, nowhere to reframe with the distance of a screen between them. She would have it when he came home. She already knew what she was going to say. She'd been building toward it for longer than she realized. And the building was done now, the structure complete, and what was left was simply to walk through the door and stand in the room that had always been there on the other side. Right. She slept for the first time in several months without lying awake, waiting for the ceiling to tell her something. Outside Linda's house, the October night settled in over Cincinnati, the particular darkness of a Midwestern autumn. Not dramatic, not beautiful in any postcard way, just the honest dark of a night that would become morning. The way nights do, regardless of what they contained. Margaret lay in the guest room with the paperback on the nightstand and the empty almond bag on the table and the sound of the house settling around her, and she thought about the word Donna had used. Overreacted. She turned it over carefully, the way she turned over invoices and proposals and things that were being presented as one thing but required closer reading. She examined it from all the angles Richard was going to use when she got home. She examined it and set it down. She had not overreacted. She had, after 4 years of underreacting, finally reacted. And she was going to have to decide, in the next 48 hours, what to do with that distinction. Richard landed in Phoenix at 12:43 p.m. local time. Margaret knew this because his location was still shared on her phone, one of those small, practical things couples do early in relationships, and then forget to turn off because they stop thinking about it. She watched the small dot settle over Sky Harbor International Airport while she was sitting at Linda's kitchen table with a second cup of coffee and the particular stillness of a woman who has made a decision and is now simply waiting for the world to catch up to it. She didn't turn off the location sharing. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because removing it felt like a provocation she wasn't ready for yet. Or maybe because there was something clarifying about watching the dot, about knowing exactly where he was in relation to where she was. The two of them in separate states. For the first time in 4 years, the distance between Columbus and Phoenix suddenly feeling like more than miles. His voicemails sat unlistened in her phone. 2 from the evening before, 1 from early that morning. She'd seen the notification at 6:15 when she woke up, the phone lighting the ceiling of Linda's guest room. She had looked at it for a moment and put it face down on the nightstand and gone back to staring at the ceiling for another 20 minutes before she accepted that sleep was finished. Linda found her in the kitchen at 7, already dressed, nursing the first coffee. "You're up early," Linda said, moving to the cabinet for a mug without ceremony. 20 years of friendship made certain things wordless. Didn't sleep much after 5. Did he call again? This morning. Didn't listen to it. Linda poured her coffee and sat down across from Margaret and looked at her, in the way she sometimes looked at her, the comprehensive, quiet assessment of a person who has known you long enough to see past what you're presenting to what's actually happening underneath. "What are you going to do today?" Linda asked. "Drive home." "Today? He won't be back until Sunday. I want to be in my own space." She looked at the window. "I have some things to sort through." "Like what?" "Like what I'm actually going to say to him." She paused. "I know what I've decided. I don't know yet how to say it without it becoming something I don't want it to be." "What don't you want it to be?" She thought about that. "A scene," she said. "I don't want it to be a scene. I want to say the true thing clearly and then be done." Linda turned her mug in her hands. "You know he's not going to let it be clean." "I know. He's going to argue. He's going to reframe. He's going to use that voice, the patient one, where he talks to you like you're a junior analyst who's misread a spreadsheet." "I know," Margaret said again, "and you have to be able to hold your ground through all of that." "I'm aware, Linda. I'm not doubting you. I'm saying it out loud so you've heard it from someone else." Linda set her mug down. "Because he's been very good, for 4 years, at making you doubt your own read on things. And I don't want you walking into Sunday night and coming out of it thinking you overreacted." Margaret looked at her. "You're the second person to use that word in 12 hours. Because it's going to be the first word out of his mouth." She drove back to Columbus after breakfast. Linda stood in the driveway and hugged her the way she always hugged her, firmly, briefly, the hug of a practical woman who expresses care through presence and then gets out of the way. She didn't say, "Call me," or "let me know how it goes," because she didn't need to. The drive back was different from the drive out. The drive out had been about processing the silent highway, the road giving her hands something to do while her brain worked. The drive back was about something else, preparation maybe, or the particular internal steadying of a woman who knows a hard conversation is coming and is getting herself ready for it. She listened to the radio on the way back. Oldies station, Because sometimes the most useful thing a radio can do is not require your emotional participation. She pulled into her driveway at noon. The house looked exactly as it always looked. Pale blue siding, the Japanese maple in the front yard that was doing its October thing, going a deep, almost alarming red at the tips. She had planted that tree 7 years ago, before Richard, when this had been entirely her house. She looked at it for a moment through the windshield. Then she went inside. The house had the particular quality of a space that has been empty for 36 hours, not quite stale, but slightly suspended, the air holding the shape of the ordinary routine that had paused. She put her bag down in the entryway and stood there for a moment, looking at the kitchen through the doorway, the living room off to the left, the hallway that led to the bedroom where the ivory dress was not anymore, because Donna had taken it 2 weeks ago, without knowing it was going to matter. She found that detail oddly settling. The dress was not here. The dress was somewhere else, waiting in a closet that didn't belong to this particular difficult story. She made herself lunch. Nothing elaborate, a sandwich, an apple, the same lunch she made for herself on any ordinary workday. She ate it standing at the kitchen counter, because sitting at the table felt like performing domesticity she wasn't currently interested in. Richard texted at 2 p.m. "I hope you're using this time to think clearly." She read it twice, set the phone on the counter, but ate the last quarter of her apple. Using this time. As though the 36 hours she'd spent not being in Phoenix were a resource he'd allocated to her for a specific purpose. As though her thinking clearly was a project with a defined objective, the objective being to arrive at a conclusion that made the inconvenience of Thursday morning go away. She picked up the phone. She listened to the voicemails. The first one, from Thursday evening, was the patient voice. "Margaret, I think we both need to approach this calmly. What happened this morning wasn't meant to be what you made it. I was trying to be considerate of a team member. I think if you step back from the emotion of it, you'll see that." Pause. "Call me when you're ready to talk rationally." The second one, from later Thursday evening, was different. Less patient. The patience of performance that required effort, and the effort was showing. "I've been trying to reach you all day. I don't know where you're staying, but I hope you're somewhere sensible. We have a lot to discuss, and I need you to pick up the phone." The third one, from that morning, was the one she had anticipated, without knowing she was anticipating it. His voice was steady again, the patience restored, reconstructed overnight with visible effort. "I spoke to the hotel. There was a room available. You could have come down and joined the conference. It wasn't too late. I want you to know that I care about us. I want to talk this through in a way that's constructive. That's all I've wanted since yesterday morning. Please call me." She listened to all three with the same focused attention she brought to difficult performance reviews. She was listening not for content, but for pattern, for the specific shape of what was being communicated underneath the words. What she heard was this, in 3 voicemails over 18 hours. Richard had not once said, "I'm sorry I gave your seat away." He had not said, "I should have asked you first." He had not said, "I understand why you're upset." He had said, in various phrasings, that she needed to think clearly and approach things calmly and be sensible, and that what happened was not what she had made it. He had spent 18 hours telling her, in different ways, that her reaction was the problem. She set the phone down. She went to her home office, the small room off the hallway, that had been a study before Richard moved in and had gradually, over 4 years, accumulated some of his things without her noticing it happening: a spare charging cable, a stack of industry magazines he never read but collected, a set of branded conference notebooks from firms she didn't recognize. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She did not write anything. She just sat there for a few minutes, in the particular quiet of her own house on a Friday afternoon, and let herself be in the fullness of what she knew. Then she opened a new document and she started a list. Not an emotional list, not a grievances list, the kind of list she made professionally factual, specific, chronological. The dinner he had planned without consulting her, and the date that had conflicted with Donna's anniversary. The vacation booked without discussion. The commitments made in her name. The photographs on the company's social media where Danielle stood too close. The way he talked to her at his colleagues' dinners, not dismissively, Nothing crude enough to call out in public, but with a specific undercurrent of management, of steering, as though she were a presentation he was running, rather than a person he was with. The seat on the plane, the lie to Danielle, she typed it all. It took 45 minutes. When she finished, she read through it once. Then she closed the laptop. She called Donna. He lied to her, Donna said immediately, before Margaret had gotten through the third sentence. That's still the thing I keep coming back to. Not the seat, the lie. Yes, because the seat is bad. The seat is dismissive, and it tells you a lot about how he sees your comfort in relation to his convenience. But the lie, Donna paused. The lie means he knew you wouldn't agree. He knew you'd have a reaction, so he preemptively built a story that took your reaction away from you before you could have it. That's exactly what it means, Margaret said. How long do you think he's been doing that? The preemptive thing? She thought about the list. A while, she said. And you're going to tell him it's over when he gets back. Yes, Sunday. A pause. Do you want me there? No. I want to do it myself. What if he, Donna? Her voice was gentle but firm. I've been a hospital administrator for 23 years. I've told people things they didn't want to hear, in rooms where I had no backup. I'll be okay. Donna was quiet for a moment. The dress is still in my closet. Keep it for now. I'll figure out what to do with it later. After she hung up, she sat in the living room for a while. Not doing anything specific, just existing in the house that had been hers before it was theirs. Feeling the particular quality of reclaiming a space in your mind that you had gradually, without meaning to, started renting to someone else. Saturday was quiet. She cleaned the house not because it was dirty, but because cleaning was something to do with her body while her mind finished its work. She called her sister again briefly. She went for a long walk in the afternoon. The October air cold and clear and smelling of leaves and distant wood smoke. And she walked for 90 minutes without any particular destination, and came home with her cheeks cold and her thoughts settled in a way they hadn't been since Thursday morning. She was ready. Richard came home at 7:43 Sunday evening. She heard his car in the driveway, heard the particular sound of him, the way he set his bag down in the entryway with a specific thud, the way his keys hit the bowl by the door. She was in the living room. She had not turned on the television. She was sitting in the armchair that she had always preferred, and he had always mildly tolerated, a large, somewhat worn wingback that had been her mother's and did not match anything else in the room, and that she had kept anyway because some things are worth keeping precisely because they don't match. She heard him come down the hallway. He appeared in the doorway. He looked tired. He had the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent 3 days performing professionally and was now in a space where the performance could drop. His tie was loosened. He had the conference badge still clipped to his jacket pocket, which he always did forgot to take it off until he was already home, already somewhere else. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You're here," he said. "I live here," she said. Something moved through his expression. Not quite relief and not quite the start of whatever argument he'd been preparing on the flight back. Something more complex, the look of a man who has rehearsed several versions of a conversation and is now trying to assess which one applies. He came into the room. He sat on the couch not close to her, at the far end, which meant he'd clocked the distance she was maintaining even from across the room. He set his conference bag on the floor beside him. "I think we should talk about Thursday," he said. "Yes," she said. "I've had time to think about it." "So have I." He looked at her. Something in her tone, the particular evenness of it, which was not the evenness of someone who has calmed down, but the evenness of someone who has moved somewhere beyond the emotion, into something more solid, shifted his posture slightly. He leaned forward, put his elbows on his knees. "I should have handled it differently," he said. It surprised her. She registered the surprise without showing it. "The way I told you about the seat," he continued. "That was I was dismissive. I know that. I was distracted. The flight was about to push back, and I handled it poorly." She waited. Because this was the part she'd expected the partial acknowledgement, the one that conceded the surface thing, in order to close the conversation before it reached the deeper thing. "I'm sorry for that," he said. She looked at him. "I appreciate that," she said. He sat back slightly. The body language of someone who believes the concession has landed and the conversation is moving toward resolution. I think we both got worked up about something that since... Tell me about the conversation you had with Danielle, Margaret said. He stopped. Before I got to the gate, she said. The conversation where you told her I'd agreed to the seat swap. That we'd discussed it the night before. The room had a specific quality in the moment after she said it, the particular texture of a silence that has been produced by something landing exactly where it was aimed. She called you, he said. She called me, Margaret confirmed. She felt bad. She wanted me to know she hadn't realized I didn't know. Richard looked at the coffee table. He pressed his hands flat on his knees, which she recognized as the gesture of a man buying himself a half-second to decide how to proceed. I told her what I did, because I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable, he said. She's young. She didn't know the seat was. You invented my consent, Margaret said. He looked up. You told her we had a conversation we never had. You told her I'd agreed to something I was never asked about. You didn't just give away my seat, Richard. You made up a version of me that agreed to it, so that nobody in the situation had to feel bad, except me. She held his gaze, which required me not knowing, which is why you didn't tell me before I got to the gate. His jaw tightened. Is it not accurate? You're making it sound, is it accurate? He looked at her. He was not a man who lost arguments easily, and he was not a man who went to full deflection when partial admission was the smarter play. She could see him working through it, the brief internal calculation of someone who understands that denying the provably true things is a strategic error. I handled it the way that seemed practical in the moment, he said. Practical, she repeated. Danielle was already seated. The plane was boarding. Making a scene in the aisle wasn't going to help anyone. I didn't make a scene. I asked you about it, and you told me to go sit in the back. I told you there was a seat available in the middle section, at the back of the plane. Her voice was still completely level. I had the window seat in row 14. I booked it 4 months ago. You gave it to your 24-year-old analyst. You lied to her about having my permission, and when I showed up, you told me there was a seat in the back. That's what happened. He stopped, took a breath. Reset, Margaret. I'm acknowledging that I handled it badly. I've said that. But I need you to also acknowledge that you handled your response badly. You walked off the plane. You disappeared for 2 days. You didn't answer my calls. I needed time to think. You needed. He stood up, not abruptly, but with the controlled energy of someone who has been sitting still for longer than is comfortable. He walked to the window, stood with his back to her, looking out at the street. You've been punishing me since Thursday morning, he said. That's what the silence was. Punishment. I wasn't punishing you. I was thinking for 2 days. Yes, without returning a single call. I listened to your voicemails, she said. He turned. And in 3 messages over 18 hours, you didn't once say you were sorry for what actually happened. You said you were sorry for how you handled it. You said you wanted me to think clearly and approach things calmly. You said what happened wasn't what I made it. She paused. You spent 2 days telling me my reaction was wrong. You didn't spend a single sentence on why I might have had it. He looked at her. That's not true, he said, but his voice had shifted slightly. The patient quality harder to maintain. Which part? He stopped. He crossed back from the window and stood near the couch but didn't sit. I've been trying to reach you for 2 days. I've been worried about you. I came home expecting to have a real conversation, and instead he gestured slightly, a frustrated half gesture that encompassed her posture, her stillness, the space between them. You're doing this, what am I doing? This thing where you're calm in a way that's not actually calm, where you're holding everything back and making me do all the work. She looked at him for a moment. I'm not holding anything back. I'm going to say everything I'm thinking. I just need you to stop interrupting long enough to hear it. He sat back down, heavy, the sit of someone lowering themselves into something they know they won't enjoy. Go ahead, he said. She had prepared for this. Not the words exactly, she had not scripted it, because scripted things came out flat, and she needed this to be real, but the shape of it. The order. The way a woman builds a case not for a jury, but for the person across from her. in the hope that the evidence clearly enough laid out can cut through the defense mechanisms of someone who is very good at defense. She told him about the list. Not in those words she didn't say, "I made a list," but she moved through it. The engagement party, the vacation, the commitments in her name, the conference dinners where she had felt managed rather than accompanied, the social media photographs she had noticed and filed and told herself she was overreading. He interrupted twice. She held up her hand both times, gently but clearly, and continued. "I've spent 4 years making allowances," she said. "I've told myself that you show love differently, that you're not a demonstrative person, that the things that bothered me were small, and I was letting them be bigger than they were. And some of that was true, and some of it was me doing the thing I've always done, which is being sensible about things that deserved a different response. You're describing a whole relationship, like I've been some kind of..." "Let me finish." He closed his mouth. His jaw was tight. She could see it. "The seat on the plane is not the reason I'm sitting here telling you this," she said. "The seat on the plane is the moment I stopped being able to reframe what I already knew. It was visible enough and public enough, and the lie to Danielle was clear enough that I couldn't talk myself out of what I was looking at." "And what are you looking at?" he said. "Tight, controlled. A relationship where I've been managed more than I've been loved." The room went completely quiet. He stared at her. The look of a man receiving something he didn't anticipate, not because it was wrong, but because it was specific. Because it named a thing that had existed without a name, and having the name gave it a different weight. "That's not..." He stopped. His voice had changed. The patient register had cracked, just at the edge, the way a surface cracks before it gives. "That's an unfair characterization." "I don't think it is," she said. "I've built a life with you. We have a house. We have plans. We have a wedding in 5 months. I know what we have." She looked at him steadily. "And I'm telling you that what we have is not what I thought it was. Not because I was wrong to hope for it, but because I've been so invested in the version of us believed in that I stopped looking clearly at the version that was actually in front of me." He stood up again. He moved to the kitchen doorway and stood there with his hand on the frame, his back partly toward her, and he was quiet for long enough that she counted 4 seconds, 5, 6. "You're ending the engagement," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," she said. He turned. His face had gone through several things and had come out the other side of them into something flat and hard, not grief, not yet, but the specific expression of a man who has just had control removed from a situation and is working out how to take it back. "Because of a seat on a plane," he said, "because of what the seat represented, and because of what I found when I looked directly at the last 4 years. This is..." He shook his head, moved back into the room, stood in the middle of it. "This is the most... What you're doing right now is ending a 4-year relationship. Because you had a bad morning and you let it turn into something in your head over 2 days at Linda's. That's not what happened. And now you're sitting in that chair telling me you've been unhappy and unheard and managed. And I'm supposed to, what? Accept that? Agree that everything I've put into this relationship has been some kind of manipulation." "I didn't say manipulation. You said managed. They're not the same thing. They feel the same from where I'm standing." His voice had risen. Not shouting. Richard did not shout, but elevated past the controlled register, the effort of keeping it contained visible now in the muscles of his neck, in the way he was standing. "I have given you 4 years. I moved in here. I rearranged my life. Your life is largely intact," she said quietly. "You work in the same place. You see the same people. You go to the same conferences." She paused. "My life is the one that accommodated yours." He stopped. He pressed his hand to his forehead. He looked at the ceiling briefly, and then back at her. "Margaret, I love you. Whatever else you think." "I know you do," she said. "In your way." The phrase landed. She could see it land. "In my way," he repeated. "Yes. What does that mean?" "It means you love me within the limits of how much of me you're willing to actually see." She said it without heat. The heat had finished its work days ago. What was left was simply the truth, which didn't need temperature to be what it was. You love the Margaret who fits into your life neatly. who makes sensible decisions about small things and defers on the larger ones, who doesn't make scenes in airplane aisles. She paused. I'm not that person, Richard. I've been performing her for 4 years because I wanted the relationship to be what I hoped it was. He looked at her for a long time. You're not going to change your mind, he said. No. Even if we go to counseling, Richard. Her voice was very gentle, which was harder than the firmness in some ways. Harder to receive. I'm not leaving because you did one thing wrong. I'm leaving because I've been wrong about the shape of this for long enough that I'm tired of the shape. The fight went out of him then, not all at once. Gradually, the way a building settles rather than collapses. He sat back down on the couch. He sat the way a man sits when he's been carrying something upright for a long time and has finally stopped. She looked at him. The specific sadness of it, not the grief of loss exactly, but something closer to the particular sorrow of seeing clearly a thing you wished you'd seen differently. She was not angry at him. She had been, briefly, and the anger had done its work and passed. What remained was more complicated and less actionable. He said after a long time, she told you about the seat. Danielle. Yes, she wasn't supposed to. He stopped. Something's moved through his face. She called you. She felt bad. He laughed, a short, entirely humorless sound. She felt bad. He sat with that for a moment. Then he looked at Margaret with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not defeat, exactly. Something more stripped down. The look of a man who is done performing. Is there anything I can say? He asked. I don't think so, she said. Not tonight. He nodded slowly. Then he stood and he picked up his conference bag and he walked to the hallway, and she heard him go up the stairs, not to the bedroom, to the guest room, the one where she kept extra blankets, and the old reading lamp that didn't match anything, and she heard the door close, and the house was quiet. She sat in the armchair that had been her mother's, and looked at the room that was hers, that had been hers before it was theirs, that would be hers again, in the particular uncomplicated way of a thing that was always really yours returning to itself, and she felt the specific weight of a decision made and landed and past the point where it could be unmade. Her phone buzzed on the end table beside her. She looked at it. Expecting Richard upstairs, another attempt at a conversation, the conversation was already past. It was Danielle. She stared at the name, then she answered, because she was a woman who answered things. Mrs. Calloway. Danielle's voice was tight, something different in it. From the previous call, the careful rehearsal was gone, replaced by something raw and slightly unsteady. I need to tell you something, and I need you to know that I didn't know. Please, I need you to know that I genuinely didn't know. Margaret's hand tightened on the phone. Didn't know what, Danielle? The pause that followed had a specific weight to it. The pause of someone standing at the edge of something they cannot take back once they've stepped off it. We've been. Danielle's breath came out uneven. It wasn't just the seat. I thought you should know it wasn't just the seat. He told me you two were basically over. He told me the engagement was. He said you'd been thinking about ending things for months. He said it was fine. The living room was very still. He said it was fine, Margaret repeated. I'm so sorry. I didn't. I would never have if I'd known you didn't know. I never would have. Margaret closed her eyes, opened them. The Japanese maple was just visible through the front window. The October night, making it a dark shape against a darker background. Nothing of the alarming red left, just the shape of a thing that had put its roots down and stayed. How long? Margaret asked. The silence on Danielle's end was its own answer. But she gave the word one anyway. 4 months, she said. 4 months. The booking date for seat 14A. Thank you for telling me, Margaret said. Her voice was completely steady. It came from the same place the steadiness had come from for 2 days, not from the absence of feeling, but from the fact that on some level, deep in the locked compartment where she kept the things she hadn't been ready to look at, she had already known the shape of this. She had known it the way you know the name of something before you've been formally introduced. She ended the call. She sat in her mother's chair in her own house on a Sunday night in October, and she let the fullness of it arrive. Not the shock, there was less shock than she expected, which was its own kind of information, but the particular sorrow of it, the specific cost of having been sensible about the wrong things for too long. Above her, she could hear Richard moving in the guest room. She picked up her phone. She called her sister. Donna answered on the second ring. "He's been seeing her," Margaret said. A single sharp exhale from Donna. 4 months, Margaret said. "He told her we were basically over. He told her it was fine." "Margaret, I'm okay," she said. And she meant it, which was the strangest part. Not okay in the sense of uninjured, but okay in the sense of standing, upright, in possession of what was true. "I need you to do something for me. Anything. The dress in your closet," she said. "I need you to return it for me." Donna was quiet for exactly 1 second. "Then already done," she said. And Margaret could hear in her voice that she meant it as something larger than a task. She meant it as the specific, practical, irreversible confirmation that her sister was in her corner, and the corner was solid ground. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Margaret sat in her mother's chair and listened to the sound of the house around her, and she understood that the conversation upstairs was not finished. That Richard was going to come down those stairs tonight or tomorrow morning with whatever he had left to say, and that whatever it was would have to be received and answered and moved through. But she also understood, with the cold and quiet clarity that had been her companion since Thursday morning, that the conversation was no longer capable of changing anything. She had been managing the shape of her own life around the edges of his for 4 years. She was done being managed in return. The floorboard creaked again, and then she heard his footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate, and the sound of a man who has decided to come down and say the thing he has calculated still needs saying. And Margaret Calloway took one breath, slow and full, and prepared herself for what was coming through the door. His footsteps on the stairs had the particular weight of a man who had made a decision on the way down and was committed to it by the time he reached the bottom. Margaret heard him in the hallway. She did not move from the chair. She kept her hands loose in her lap, which was a thing she had learned to do, in difficult meetings not crossed, not gripped together, just resting. Because the body broadcasts what the mind is working through, and she did not want to broadcast anything right now that could be read as weakness or openness to negotiation. Richard appeared in the doorway. He had changed into different clothes, not pajamas, not the conference suit, but jeans and a dark sweater, which told her something. He had made a deliberate choice about how to present himself for whatever was about to happen. He had dressed for a conversation. He looked at her. She looked at him. The expression on his face was not what she had expected. She had prepared for the patient voice, for the controlled reframing, for the particular kind of calm that was really a long-game argument dressed up as reason. What she saw instead was something different, not soft. Richard did not do soft, but something that had been stripped of its professional finish. He looked, for the first time since he had walked through the door, like a man rather than a position. "She called you," he said. "Yes." He came into the room. He did not sit. He stood near the fireplace, the one they had never used, because he said gas fireplaces were aesthetically dishonest, which was the kind of opinion that had charmed her early on and which she now filed alongside everything else she had been generous about. He stood there with his arms at his sides and looked at her with the expression of someone who has run out of moves and knows it. "How much did she tell you?" he said. "Enough," Margaret said. "Define enough." 4 months. She said it had been 4 months. She said you told her the engagement was over in everything but paperwork. That I'd been thinking about ending it for months. She paused. That it was fine. He looked at the unlit fireplace. His jaw moved. He was working through something, the calculation. She could always see when he was doing it. The brief internal sorting of information into what was useful and what needed to be managed. "I made a serious mistake," he said. "Yes." And he stopped. Started again. "I'm not going to insult you by calling it something smaller than what it is. I appreciate that, but I need you to hear something." He turned back to her. His voice had a quality she had not heard from him in a long time, maybe ever. The quality of someone saying a thing they actually mean, rather than a thing they have decided to say. "What I told Danielle about us, it wasn't a lie that came from nowhere. There's Margaret. You have been somewhere else for the better part of a year. You have been going through the motions of this relationship in a way that I could feel but couldn't name. He stopped. I'm not saying that makes what I did right. I'm saying that I told myself a story about where we were, and I started behaving as though the story were already true. She looked at him. You behaved as though I had already left, she said, so that you didn't have to feel like you were doing something wrong. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. That's not how that works, she said. I know. You don't get to decide the relationship is over and start another one without telling me. Her voice had stayed level through all of it, through Sunday morning, and the voicemails, and the conversation an hour ago, but something changed now, not in volume, but in texture. The specific controlled quality of a woman who is being very careful not to let everything come out at once because some of it needs to stay, contained long enough to be useful. You don't get to rewrite where we are and then let me live in a version of the story I don't even know I'm in. I know, he said again. Stop saying I know. He closed his mouth. She stood up. She had been sitting for the whole conversation, and the sitting had been a choice deliberate, the posture of a woman who was not going to perform agitation, but she was done with it. She stood and she crossed to the window, which was what she did when she needed the 6 feet of distance and the view of something that was not his face. The street outside was quiet. Sunday night in Columbus. A neighbor's porch light. The Japanese maple dark against the dark. How many people know? She said. What? People at the firm. His colleagues. The people at that conference this week who watched you introduce her and watched the two of you at dinner. She turned. How many of them knew what she was to you while they were shaking my hand at the engagement party? It was very still. Richard, not... He pressed his hand against the back of his neck. Not many. How many is not many? Marcus knew. Marcus Chen was Richard's closest colleague, a man she had sat beside at 3 separate dinners and who had looked her in the eye and talked about wedding venues and asked about her work with the easy warmth of someone who considered her a friend. She had liked Marcus. She had been genuinely looking forward to what she had believed was an uncomplicated professional friendship becoming something more personal as she and Richard built their life together. Marcus knew, she said. He found out. I didn't tell him outright. He figured it out. And he didn't say anything to me. He was in a difficult position. He sat next to me at the Morrison dinner in August and asked me about the wedding flowers. Her voice had gone completely flat. We spent 20 minutes talking about flowers, Richard. I know. Stop. He stopped. She turned back to the window. She pressed her fingertips against the glass, which was cold. October cold through single-pane glass, the kind of cold that comes through regardless, that you feel even when you're not looking for it. I'm going to need you to leave tonight, she said. Margaret, not permanently. I'm not asking you to move out tonight. She turned. But I need you not to be in this house right now. I need to be here by myself, and I need you to go somewhere else. It's 9:30 at night. I know what time it is. Where am I supposed to? I don't know, Richard. A hotel. Marcus's house, since Marcus is apparently the person you've been confiding in. She held his gaze. I need you to not be here. He looked at her for a long moment. The look of a man who is calculating the cost of pushing back against this specific request and determining it's too high. He picked up his conference bag from the hallway. He came back to the living room doorway and stood there briefly, not speaking, just in the space, as though he were memorizing the particular arrangement of things or looking for something to say that would change the architecture of the evening. He didn't find it. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. Fine, she said. He left. She heard the front door close. She heard his car back out of the driveway. She stood at the window and watched his taillights disappear at the end of the street, and then she stood there for another minute looking at the spot where they had been, the empty air that was just street now, ordinary street. Then she went to the kitchen, and she made tea, because it was the thing she could do that required using her hands and keeping her mind occupied with something small and finite. Fill the kettle, heat the water, take the mug from the cabinet, the one with the small chip in the handle that she kept meaning to throw away and never did. She made the tea, and she stood at the counter, and she drank it, and she let herself feel exactly what she felt, which was a complicated set of things that she did not try to arrange into an order that made sense. She called Linda at 10. He's been sleeping with Danielle, she said. No preamble. Linda didn't need preamble. A long breath. Since when? 4 months. Oh, Maggie. He told her we were basically over. He told her I'd been thinking about leaving for months. He built himself a story that made what he was doing something other than what it was. Are you okay? I made him leave. Good. I'm in the kitchen. I know. I can hear the quiet, she exhaled. Slightly unsteady. The first unsteady breath she'd let herself take in 2 days. I thought I was ending the engagement because I finally saw clearly what the relationship actually was. And then she stopped. And then it turned out the relationship I thought I was finally seeing clearly wasn't even the right picture. There was a whole other thing underneath. You didn't know. I suspected. She set the mug down. About the photographs. About the way she looked at him at the Morrison dinner. I filed it in the wrong place. You gave him the benefit of the doubt. I gave him too much benefit for too long. That's not a character flaw, Linda said. That's someone who takes commitments seriously, trying to honor what they signed up for. It got me 4 months of being the last to know. Yes, Linda said, not arguing, just agreeing, because the truth sometimes just needed someone to say yes, that happened. She slept badly that night. Not the insomniac clarity of Thursday night. This was a different kind of sleeplessness, less organized, the kind that came from having too many moving at once, thoughts bumping into each other in the dark and refusing to settle. She lay in the bed that was hers and looked at the ceiling and let the night pass. At 6 a.m, she gave up on sleeping, dressed, and went for a walk. The Columbus morning was cold, properly cold now, the October that had been flirting with autumn all month, finally committing to it. She walked without a specific route, just the neighborhood, the early light coming up pale and gray over the houses. Nobody much was out, except a man walking a large dog and a teenager waiting for a school bus with the specific sufferance of a person who has no choice about being awake. She walked for an hour. When she came back, she sat at the kitchen table with her phone, and she did something she had been putting off. She called the venue. The wedding was scheduled for the second Saturday in March. The venue was a restored farmhouse, 40 minutes outside Columbus, not elaborately grand, but specific and lovely. The kind of place that had been in the same family for 4 generations, and opened for events with the particular warmth of a space that understood what it was hosting. She had found it during a weekend drive 2 springs ago, stopped on an impulse because the gate was open, and the driveway was lined with old oaks, and she had thought, this is the kind of place I want to be married. She had booked it that same afternoon. The woman who answered was named Carol. Carol had a voice like warm bread and an administrative efficiency that Margaret recognized and appreciated the voice of someone who managed emotional occasions with practical competence. I need to discuss the booking, Margaret said. The Callaway Holt event, March 15th. A brief pause while Carol pulled it up. Of course. What can I help you with? I need to cancel, Margaret said. Another pause. Longer. I'm so sorry to hear that, Carol said, with the particular warmth of a person who had received this phone call before and understood its specific weight. Let me pull up the contract so I can walk you through the terms. The deposit was non-refundable. She had known this. The remaining balance, which was due in 60 days, which was now 7 weeks away, could be released with written notice. She would lose the deposit. She had known she would lose the deposit. I'll send the written notice today, Margaret said. We'll take care of the rest, Carol said, and Mrs. Callaway, I hope things get easier for you soon. Thank you, Margaret said. She ended the call. She sat with her phone on the table in front of her and looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up and she sent 4 text messages. The caterer, the photographer, the florist that Donna had recommended and that she had spent an afternoon with in September, walking through sample arrangements. Each message was brief and clear. Each one began with the same sentence. I need to cancel our contract for the March 15th event. The florist called back within 10 minutes. She let it go to voicemail. The photographer texted, Oh no, I hope you're okay. We'll be in touch about the paperwork. She looked at that text for a moment. The particular small humanity of it. We'll be in touch about the paperwork, but also, I hope you're okay. 2 things at once, the practical and the personal, which was how most people were actually built, in her experience. Most people held both. Richard called at 8:30. "Did you sleep?" He said, "Some. I want to come by this morning. I want to talk." She thought about it. Not because she was reconsidering anything, she was not reconsidering anything, but because she was deciding on the shape of what still needed to happen. There were practical things. The house. His things. The logistics of unwinding a 4-year shared life, which were not simple and could not be avoided. "Come at 10, she said. Okay. He arrived at 9:57, which was very slightly early, which meant he had been nearby and waiting. He was wearing different clothes from last night. He had gone, apparently, to a hotel and had showered and dressed with the particular care of someone who understood they were walking into a situation where presentation mattered. She let him in without ceremony and did not offer tea or coffee, which would have created a domestic warmth she wasn't interested in. They sat in the living room, her in the armchair, him on the couch, same arrangement as the night before, which felt intentional or accidental, she couldn't tell. "I've been thinking all night," he said. "So have I. I want to fix this." She looked at him. "Which part?" "All of it. Danielle, it was a mistake. A serious mistake. I'm not going to minimize it. But Margaret, what we have." "Richard." Her voice was quiet. "I canceled the venue this morning." He stopped. "And the caterer. And the photographer." She paused. "The florist will take a little longer because there's a deposit structure. But I called them too." He stared at her. The particular look of a man watching something he thought might still be reversible, come irreversible in real time. "You can't," he stopped. "You can't just—" "I can," she said. "I did. Margaret, if we take some time, if we go to someone together, a counselor, someone who can." "I'm not going to counseling with you," she said, not unkindly. "Not because I'm against counseling, because I'm not trying to save this. I'm trying to close it as cleanly as possible. After 4 years. Yes, after 4 years. He pressed his hands flat on his knees, the gesture she recognized, the half-second of buying time. "Is this about Danielle, or is this about what you said last night? The managed thing?" "It's about all of it," she said. "It was about all of it before Danielle called me. Danielle just removed the last thing I might have been tempted to talk myself out of. I can end it with her. I know you can, I will. It's already, I ended it last night. I called her from the hotel." He leaned forward. "Whatever you think about how I've been in this relationship, whatever I've done wrong, and I have done things wrong, I understand that now I am telling you I want to fix it." She looked at him. She looked at the face she had looked at for 4 years, not without feeling. She was not without feeling. She was not a woman built for the absence of feeling, but with the particular quality of seeing something clearly, rather than hopefully. "I believe you mean that right now," she said. "I do. I believe that last night, in a hotel room, thinking about all of this, you arrived at the genuine conclusion that you want to fix it." She paused. "But I need you to understand something. The person who needs to be fixed is not the relationship. It's the way you move through a relationship, the way you make unilateral decisions and manage information and build stories that take other people's choices away from them before they can make them." She held his gaze. "That's not something a couples counselor fixes in 8 sessions, Richard. That's work that takes a very long time and has to come from you wanting to do it for yourself. Not to save something, not to get something back, for yourself." He was quiet. "And I'm not interested in being the reason you do that work," she said. "I'm not interested in being the project that motivates you to become a different person. That's not a relationship. That's a renovation." Something in his face not collapse, because Richard did not collapse, but the closest thing to it she had ever seen. A settling. The specific heaviness of a man who has made his best argument and heard it received and understood that it is not going to change the outcome. "What do you need from me?" he said, finally, quietly. "I need you to move your things out by the end of the month," she said. "I'll make a list of what's mine and what's yours. We bought some things together. We can sort those out without attorneys, if you're willing to be straightforward about it." "I'm willing. I'll keep the house. It was mine before we were together. I'm not asking you for anything except your cooperation in making this as undramatic as possible." He looked at his hands. "That's really all?" "That's all." He nodded. long and slow, the nod of a man absorbing the dimensions of something he cannot change. Then he looked up, and there was something in his face, not the patient register, not the conference room confidence, just a man at 54 looking at the woman he had not treated as well as she deserved, and knowing it, possibly for the first time, without the apparatus of his own defense systems in the way. "I'm sorry," he said, "not for how I handled things. For the actual thing, for what I did." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "He left at 11:15. She watched his car from the window, and this time she did not stay at the glass after his taillights disappeared. She turned back to the room, and she picked up her phone, and she called her office. She was technically still on vacation until Thursday. But she had a colleague she trusted, a woman named Frances, who had worked alongside her for 11 years, and who answered her calls regardless of the hour or the day. "Frances," she said, "I know it's Monday. I know I'm supposed to be in Phoenix. I need to talk to someone at the hospital about something." "About work?" Frances said. "Yes. Not about me. About I want to look at something. I've been thinking about it since last week, and I want to look at it with fresh eyes." She paused. "I'll explain when I'm in. I'll be here." She drove to Mercy General at noon. She walked through the corridors. She had walked for 23 years, the specific institutional geography of a place that had shaped her, the smells of it, and the sounds, and the way the light came through the East Wing windows at this particular hour. She felt, walking through them, the specific solidity of a person returning to the place where they know exactly who they are. The hospital did not require her to perform anything or manage anything about her own presentation. It required only competence, and competence she had in abundance. She found Frances in the administrative wing. Frances looked at her with the careful, assessing attention of someone who has known a person long enough to read the weather in their face. "You look," she started. "I ended the engagement," Margaret said. "It's done. I don't need to talk about it right now." She put her bag on her desk. "What I need is to look at the Carson proposal from last month." The Carson proposal was a restructuring document that her hospital board had been reviewing for the past 6 weeks, a proposed merger with a larger regional health network that would bring resources and reach, but required the kind of organizational change that historically produced a wave of good intentions and a flood of unintended consequences. Margaret had been in the early review meetings before Phoenix. She had been uneasy about something in the document's financial projections, but hadn't had time to locate what exactly was making her uneasy. Frances pulled it up without questions. Margaret sat down and started reading. She read for 2 hours. Frances brought coffee at the 30-minute mark and left her alone, which was the right thing to do. At the 2-hour mark, she found it. It was in the staffing projections. A footnote in Appendix C that referenced a reclassification plan, a plan to convert a substantial percentage of senior nursing positions from full-time to part-time status as part of an efficiency restructuring. The reclassification would technically maintain headcount while effectively reducing the nursing staff's benefits eligibility and their guaranteed hours. It was the kind of change that looked fine in a spreadsheet and would be catastrophic on a floor. She sat with that for a long moment. She had 23 years at this hospital. She knew every ward, every department head, every long-serving nurse who had built their life around the stability of their position. She knew what this footnote meant for those people not in the abstract, but specifically. She knew Diane in the cardiac unit who had 2 kids in college. She knew Terrence in the ER who was supporting his mother. She knew the specific human weight of what Appendix C was proposing to do and calling efficiency. She closed the document. She opened her email and she wrote a memo. It was not a diplomatic memo. It was the memo of a person who had spent a week being shaken out of sensibleness and was no longer interested in the version of herself that softened difficult things so that they could be more easily received. She wrote it plainly. She named the footnote. She named the specific populations of staff it would affect. She named the contractual obligations the hospital had to its employees that this reclassification would technically skirt while practically violating their intent. She used words that were accurate rather than careful, not restructuring challenge, but broken promise. Not staffing optimization, but benefit elimination. She addressed it to the board chair, the CFO, and the medical director, and she copied Francis. Then she stopped. She read through it once. Her hand was on the mouse. The cursor was over the send button. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it automatically, the reflex of someone who spent their days managing urgent communications. She expected Richard. She expected Francis from across the office. She expected Donna or Linda. It was a number she didn't recognize. Columbus area code. She almost let it pass. She answered. Is this Margaret Calloway? A man's voice. Professional. Slightly cautious. Yes, Miss Calloway, my name is David Park. I'm an attorney. I'm calling because I've been retained by Danielle Marsh. A pause. I think you and I need to meet. She sat very still. Why? Because what Miss Marsh shared with you last night is it's part of a larger situation that I'm not comfortable discussing by phone. There are some things you need to be aware of that are directly relevant to your interests. Another pause. I know this is an unusual call. I understand if you need time to process it. What kind of attorney are you? She said. Employment law, he said. Ms. Marsh has filed a complaint with HR at Holt Consulting. She filed this morning. A pause. It involves Richard Holt directly, and it involves several months of conduct that Miss Marsh's account of I want to make sure, sir, you have the full picture before anyone presents you with a version of it. Margaret's hand was still on the mouse. The email was still on the screen. The cursor still over send. She filed a complaint, Margaret said. Yes. About what, specifically? The attorney paused. The pause of a man choosing his words with professional care. The relationship was not according to Ms. Marsh's account. The relationship was not fully voluntary on her part. She is alleging that Mr. Holt used his position as her direct supervisor to create a situation in which she felt she could not refuse his advances without jeopardizing her employment. The office was very quiet. Margaret looked at the wall across from her desk. She looked at it the way she had looked at the ceiling on Thursday morning and the street on Sunday night as a blank surface. It required nothing from her while her brain processed something that was rearranging the furniture of everything she thought she understood. Danielle had told her 4 months. She had told her it was fine. She had said, I didn't know you didn't know, which Margaret had received as the account of a young woman who had been misled by a man she trusted. She had not understood until this moment that the misleading might have run in a different direction than she thought. That Danielle being misled might not mean Danielle had been a willing participant in the misleading. She felt she couldn't refuse, Margaret said. That's her account, yes. And she's filed this morning. Yes, a few hours ago. Which is why I'm calling you now, rather than later. The attorney's voice was careful but not cold. The voice of a man doing a difficult thing, in the most decent way available. Ms. Marsh wanted you to know directly, from someone who could give you the information properly before the HR process at Holt Consulting is going to move. When it does, there will be people who talk to you. And I want you to be prepared for what they're going to say. Margaret looked at her email, the memo to the board. The cursor still hovering. She had built a version of Sunday Night's Story in which she was the wronged party in a recognizable way, in which Richard had been selfish and careless and had done something inexcusable but understandable in the specific grammar of human failure, in which Danielle was a complicating variable, young, and perhaps not entirely without agency, the kind of figure who existed in stories like this and was uncomfortable to look at directly. She had been telling herself a story that was the right size for the hurts she was already carrying. This was a larger story. What do you need from me? She said. Her voice was very steady, came from the same place. All the steadiness had come from the locked compartment, the place where things that were too large to process immediately were held still long enough to be useful. Nothing right now, the attorney said. I wanted you to be informed. I may need to speak with you in more detail later, if you're willing. But for now, I just wanted you to know. Thank you, she said. For calling. She ended the call. She sat in her office at Mercy General with the memo on the screen and the cursor over send and the phone in her hand, and she looked at the email she had written with the plain, accurate words, not restructuring challenge, but broken promise not optimization, but elimination, and she felt the particular vertigo of a person who has arrived at what they thought was the bottom of something and discovered there is more below. Danielle Marsh had called her Sunday night from a place of guilt. She had called her to confess to a thing she felt she had participated in. She had said, "I would never have, and I didn't know, and I'm sorry." And Margaret had received those words as the words of a young woman who had made a mistake involving a man who had lied to everyone in the situation. She had not fully heard what was underneath them. She clicked send on the memo, not because of Richard, not because of Danielle, but because Appendix C was still Appendix C, and Diane in the cardiac unit still had 2 kids in college, and some things did not wait for the personal to resolve itself before they required action. Then she set the phone face up on her desk and looked at it and waited for the next thing to arrive. Did not take long. Frances appeared in her doorway at 3:47 p.m. Frances had a look on her face that Margaret had seen once before, the look she had worn when a board meeting had gone in a direction no one had anticipated, and the consequences were already visible on the horizon before anyone in the room had finished absorbing what had just happened. "You sent the board memo," Frances said. "Yes. Harrington called me." Thomas Harrington was the CFO. He had been at Mercy General for 9 years and had the particular political instincts of a man who had survived 4 different administrations by being slightly more aligned with whoever was currently in power than whoever was on the way out. He's not happy. I imagine he's not. He wants to meet. Today, before the board chair has a chance to read it. Margaret looked at her. He wants to get ahead of it. He wants to get ahead of you. Frances crossed into the office and stood near the desk with the expression of someone who is about to say something they've been holding for a while. "Maggie, the Harrington camp has been angling toward the Carson merger for 6 months. There are people on that board who are going to see your memo as what? Accurate? As a disruption." "Good," Margaret said. "It is a disruption. That's the point." Frances looked at her. The comprehensive 11-year look. "Something has happened to you in the last 4 days. Several things. You walked in here on a Monday after canceling a vacation to Phoenix, and you wrote a memo that is going to start a fight with the CFO and potentially the board chair, and you sent it without talking to anyone first." Frances paused. That's not what I usually do," Margaret agreed. "No, what changed?" She thought about the armchair, the window, the taillights disappearing, the attorney's voice on the phone 2 hours ago. "I stopped being sensible about the wrong things," she said. "But..." Frances looked at her for a long moment. Then she pulled out the chair across from the desk, sat down in it. "Tell me," she said. So Margaret told her. Not everything, not Danielle's attorney, not the complexity of what Sunday night had turned into, but enough. Richard, the seat on the plane, the lie. The engagement ended. The list she had made and finally looked at. Frances listened with the stillness of someone who has been trusted with something and is taking the weight of it seriously. When Margaret finished, Frances looked at her desk for a moment. "Harrington is going to come at you," she said. "The memo is good. The memo is right, but the timing coming in on your vacation week, coming in after whatever happened this weekend, he's going to use it. He's going to make this about your judgment. He can try." "Maggie, Frances," she looked at her directly. "Do you think the memo is wrong?" "No. Do you think those nurses should know what Appendix C is going to do to their contracts?" "No. I mean, yes. They should know. Then it needed to be sent." She paused. "The timing doesn't change what's in Appendix." See, Frances sat with that. Then she stood up. "I'll be in my office," she said. "When Harrington calls again, I'll tell him you're available at 4:30. "Fine." She left. Margaret sat alone in her office and looked at her phone and looked at the wall and let the particular quality of the afternoon settle around her. Outside the windows of Mercy General, the Columbus afternoon was doing what it did in October, going golden and cold, the light thinning toward early dark, the kind of afternoon that made the institutional lighting inside hospitals both necessary and slightly brutal. She had come in today to do something that made sense. To look at a document and write a memo and return to the version of herself she understood, the competent, indispensable, sensible woman who held the building together. Instead, she had sent a memo that was about to start a political fight she hadn't fully mapped, received a phone call from an attorney that had turned Sunday night's story inside out and was sitting in her office at 4 in the afternoon with the accumulated weight of 4 days pressing on the specific part of her chest where she had always kept things she needed to look at later. Later had arrived. She opened her phone. She looked at Danielle Marsh's contact. The number that had called her Sunday night with the careful, rehearsed opening and the unsteady breath underneath it. She thought about what the attorney had said. She thought about the word voluntary. She thought about 24-year to direct supervisor, framed a relation mutual, but constructed in a building where the power differential was a visible and permanent feature of the architecture. She thought about how she had received Danielle's first call with the flat, managed response of a woman protecting herself from a complication she did not want to absorb, and she thought about what Danielle might have needed to hear in that moment that she had not received. She did not call her. Not yet. The attorney had been clear. The process was in motion, and there was a right order for things. And stepping into the middle of an HR proceeding with a personal phone call was the kind of instinct that needed to be examined before it was acted on. But she thought about it. She held it. Her office door opened. It was not Francis. It was Thomas Harrington, which meant he had not waited for 4:30. Harrington did not wait when he was worried. He arrived early, and he arrived already talking, which was his method to establish the terms of a conversation before the other person had finished, deciding what the conversation was about. He came in without knocking, which he had done before, and which she had always let pass because some battles were not worth the energy. Today she felt differently about it. "Thomas," she said. I said 4:30. He stopped, slightly surprised. She had not, in 11 years, responded to his early arrivals this way. "I thought we should talk at 4:30, she said. "You can wait in the hallway or in Francis's office. I'll be ready at 4:30. He looked at her. She looked at him. He left. She turned back to her desk. She put her hands flat on the surface, cool desk, solid surface, and she sat with the feeling that had been building since she walked into this office this morning, and that she now recognized for what it was. Not anger, not grief, not the particular exhaustion of a woman who had been through too much in 4 days. It was something more structural, something that had been assembling itself quietly. It had over years of being the woman who held the building together without requiring the building to hold anything for her in return. The woman who filed things away and made allowances and absorbed the small, accumulating costs of being useful and competent and there. Something in her had shifted, had been shifting since the jet bridge, had finished shifting somewhere in the space between Danielle's attorney's voice and Harrington walking through her door without knocking. She was not going to be managing this carefully anymore. Not Richard's comfort, not Harrington's political anxiety, not the version of herself that kept things running smoothly at the cost of speaking plainly about what was actually wrong. She was going to be something else now. She was not entirely sure what that looked like yet. But 4:30 was 8 minutes away, and Thomas Harrington was in the hallway, and Appendix C was in the document, and Danielle Marsh's attorney had called at 3 in the afternoon on a Monday in October, and Margaret Calloway was sitting at her desk with her hands flat on the surface, and her chest doing the thing it did when something was about to arrive that could not be managed. 4:30 arrived, the way deadlines arrive when you've already decided what you're going to do, not with ceremony. Just with the quiet inevitability of lucky clock doing the thing clocks do. Margaret stood up from her desk. She straightened her jacket with both hands, not out of vanity, but out of the particular physical act of preparation. The same thing she did before walking into rooms where something difficult was going to happen, and she needed her body to know it was ready. She picked up the printed copy of her memo and walked to the door and opened it. Harrington was in the hallway. He had a coffee he hadn't touched, and the particular rigid posture of a man who had spent 45 minutes being made to wait for something he had arrived early for. He was 57 years old and had the build of someone who had been athletic 20 years ago and carried the memory of it in his shoulders, even though the rest of him had moved on. He wore the kind of suit that communicated seriousness without imagination. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, with the specific appraisal of a man who respected competence, while preferring it in a more manageable form. "My office," Margaret said. He followed her. She left the door open, which she did deliberately. Closed doors in this building had a particular political significance, and she did not want this conversation to have the weight of a closed door attached to it. She wanted it to be exactly what it was: two colleagues in an open office discussing a document. She sat behind her desk. She did not gesture to the chair across from it. She let him choose whether to sit or stand, because how a person positioned themselves in the first 30 seconds of a difficult conversation told you something about how they were planning to approach it. He sat, which meant he was planning to be reasonable, or to perform reasonableness long enough to get what he wanted. "The memo," he said. "Yes. You sent it without going through the review process. The review process for internal communications is a courtesy, not a requirement." She set the printed copy on the desk between them. "I'm a senior administrator. I have direct reporting access to the board on standard operational matters," he said. "This is a merger review document. The Carson proposal is still in deliberation. Your memo," he paused. He was choosing words with the care of someone who has already thought through which words play best. "Your memo introduces concerns that the board hasn't had the chance to fully contextualize. The board needs to contextualize Appendix C," she said. "That's the point. Appendix C is a preliminary staffing model. It's a reclassification plan," she said. "Call it what it is." He looked at her. Something shifted behind his eyes, a small recalibration, the look of a man who has come in with a specific approach and is now recognizing that the approach needs to be adjusted. "The reclassification is one option among several that the Carson team is exploring," he said. "It's not a decision. It's a range. It's in Appendix C of a document that's going to the full board in 17 days, she said. "In a footnote. Not in the executive summary. Not in the staffing section. A footnote in an appendix, written in language that requires a close reading and a specific knowledge of nursing contract structures to understand." She looked at him. "Why is it in a footnote?" He opened his mouth. "Don't tell me it's standard formatting," she said. "I've been reading board documents for 23 years. That footnote was written by someone who wanted what it said to be in the document without being in the document." Harrington's jaw tightened. The reasonable posture was still there, but it was working harder. "Margaret," the shift to first name, which he did when he wanted to reframe the conversation as personal rather than professional. "I understand you've had a difficult week personally, and I want you to know that I don't," she said. He stopped. "Don't use my personal week to manage this conversation," she said. "What's in Appendix C is in Appendix C, regardless of what happened to me on Thursday. The two things are not connected. I'm not suggesting they are. I'm suggesting that perhaps this week was not the ideal time to send a document of this nature without." "The board meeting is in 17 days, she said again. "What's the ideal time? 16 days from now? 15? She leaned forward slightly. "Diane Reston in cardiac has been here for 19 years. Her husband was laid off in February. Her benefits package is the reason her family has health coverage right now." She paused. "What's an Appendix C would reclassify her position in a way that eliminates that coverage within 6 months of the merger. Tell me when the ideal time was to mention that to the board." Harrington was quiet. She could hear him thinking. Not the productive kind of thinking, the strategic kind. The kind where a person is sorting through options looking for the one that costs the least. "The board will have questions," he said finally. "I expect they will. And you'll be expected to answer them. That's fine. Some of those questions are going to be uncomfortable." He said it with the specific weight of a man making a point he once understood at more than its surface level. There are people on that board who have been committed to this merger for a long time. People who have significant interests in it, proceeding without disruption. She looked at him. "Are you telling me something, Thomas?" "I'm giving you context. You're telling me there are board members who are going to be unhappy with me, and I should think about whether I want to be unhappy with those board members." She sat back. "That's not context. That's a warning." He looked at his coffee. He picked it up and set it down without drinking from it. the gesture of a man who needed something to do with his hands. "I've been here 9 years," he said. "I've been here 23. "Then you know how these things move." He looked up. Carson merger has momentum. It has money behind it. It has board members who are personally invested in its success. A memo like yours doesn't stop that momentum. It just makes the process rougher. For everyone involved, including you. She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that he shifted slightly in the chair. "I know how these things move," she said. "I know that a board that makes a decision in public, based on a clean executive summary, is much harder to reverse than one that makes it having read a footnote that's been clearly explained. I know that once Diane Reston and Terrence Hall and 27 other senior staff members have their contracts reclassified, the conversation about whether the merger was a good idea becomes theoretical." She paused. "I also know that I will be able to look Diane Reston in the eye after this board meeting." "Can you say the same?" Harrington stood up. It was not the stand of a man who had won. It was the stand of a man who has decided that continuing to sit is conceding something he isn't ready to concede. "The board chair has your memo," he said. "We'll see how the next 17 days go." "Yes," she said, "we will." He left without another word. She sat in the quiet of her office for exactly 40 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and called Francis. "He's gone," she said. "I saw him leave." Francis paused. "How bad?" "He warned me about board members with interests in the merger." I know what it is. I need you to do something for me." "Anything." "The nurses' union rep, Sheila Brandt. I need a meeting with her tomorrow morning. Before 8 if she can manage it." A pause. "You're going to tell the union." "I'm going to make sure the union has access to the same document the board does," Margaret said, with the same footnote explained in plain language. The silence on Francis's end had the quality of someone making a decision about whether to caution her or simply help her. Francis chose help. "I'll call Sheila tonight," she said. "Thank you." She hung up. She sat for a moment longer. Then she picked up her bag and her coat and walked out of her office and through the corridor and out of the building into the Columbus evening, which was cold and dark and indifferent and exactly what she needed. She drove home. She changed out of her work clothes. She made soup from a can, which she did when she was too tired to make decisions about food, and she ate it standing at the counter again. And she felt the specific physical accumulation of a day that had held too many separate, difficult things. Her phone lit up. "Richard," she answered. "I've spoken to HR," he said. His voice was flat, the flatness not of someone who was calm, but of someone who was using control tone as a last available shield. "They reached out to me this afternoon." "I know," she said. A pause. "You know. Her attorney called me." He stopped. When he spoke again, the flatness had cracked at the edges. "She has an attorney. She filed this morning, Richard. She's Margaret. This is..." He stopped again. She could hear him breathing. The specific breathing of a person in the early stages of understanding that a situation has moved entirely outside their control. "She told me she was fine. She told me she agreed to everything. She was never..." "I'm not the right person to have this conversation with," Margaret said. "You're the only person I..." "Richard," her voice was not unkind, but it was firm. "This is happening in a space that does not involve me anymore. You need to call your attorney. Tonight, if possible." "I don't have..." "Get one," she said. Tonight she hung up. She stood at the counter with the empty soup can and the cold kitchen light and let herself feel the weight of what that conversation had been. Not grief for Richard, exactly, but something more complicated. The specific sadness of watching someone you once chose discover that the story they told themselves about who they were does not match the world's accounting of it. She did not feel responsible for that, but she felt it because she was a person who felt things and she was done pretending otherwise. She called Donna at 8. "The CFO warned me about board members," she said. "Warned you how?" "In the way men like that warn women like me." With context. She said the word the way Harrington had said it. And then Richard called. The HR process has started at his firm. Donna was quiet for a moment. "How are you actually doing?" "I'm standing," Margaret said. "Everything is moving very fast and I'm standing." "That's enough right now." "I don't know if it is." "It is," Donna said. You're not supposed to be sprinting yet. You just had the ground taken out from under you, 4 different ways in 4 days. Standing is enough. She woke up Tuesday morning with the particular clarity that comes after insufficient sleep. Everything slightly too sharp at the edges, the world too present. She was at the hospital at 7:40. Sheila Brandt was already there, which meant Frances had reached her the night before, and she had taken the hour seriously. Sheila was 62, a union rep who had been doing this work for 25 years with the specific competence of someone who had seen every version of institutional dishonesty and was still sufficiently angry about it to keep showing up. She had short gray hair and eyes that assessed everything in a room simultaneously, and a handshake that meant something. She read Appendix C in 7 minutes. She looked up at Margaret and said, "How long have you known about this?" "I identified it yesterday," Margaret said. "I sent the board memo yesterday afternoon." Sheila set the document down. "They're going to say it's preliminary." "I know. They're going to say it's one option among several." "I know. And then in 6 months after the merger closes, they're going to say, the preliminary option was the one they had to take because of budget constraints, and nobody specifically promised anything." "Yes," Margaret said, "which is why I need you to have this document now." "Not in 6 months. Sheila looked at her with the assessing quality of someone who has worked with hospital administrators for a long time and has developed specific opinions about which ones could be trusted. "You understand what this does to you," Sheila said. "Politically. In this building. I do. Harrington is going to make your life difficult. He's already started. And if the board votes to proceed with the merger regardless, then I'll have done what I could do, and Diane Reston will know who tried and who didn't." She held Sheila's gaze. "That has to be worth something." Sheila picked up the document again, looked at Appendix C once more, set it back down with the deliberate weight of someone making a decision. "I'm calling an emergency meeting with the members Thursday morning," she said, "before the board has a chance to pre-frame this." "I'll be available for questions," Margaret said. "You'll need to be." Sheila stood, extended her hand again. "For what it's worth, this is the right thing to do." "I know," Margaret said. "I'm just getting better at doing things because they're right instead of because they're safe." Sheila left. Frances appeared in the doorway immediately after, which meant she had been waiting with the particular readiness of someone who anticipated needing to debrief. "Harrington sent an email to the board chair this morning," Frances said. "I got copied because of my administrative role." She paused. "He characterized your memo as premature and potentially disruptive to ongoing negotiations." "Of course he did. The board chair wants a meeting." Thursday afternoon. "After Sheila's meeting with the union," Margaret said. Frances looked at her. "That's going to look like I gave the union the same information the board had." "Which is what I did." Margaret straightened the papers on her desk. "Schedule the board chair for 2 o'clock Thursday." Frances nodded. "Then there's something else." The quality of her voice had changed. The efficient, practical quality that characterized almost everything Frances said had shifted slightly. Margaret looked up. "David Park called the main hospital line this morning," Frances said. "Danielle Marsh's attorney. He left a message for you. He said," she paused. "He said the HR's investigation at Holt Consulting has turned up a pattern. That Danielle wasn't the only one. The office was very still." Margaret looked at Frances. "He said there's a former junior analyst who left the firm 8 months ago as a settlement agreement under a settlement agreement." Frances said carefully. "He said the settlement included an NDA, and he said she's reached out to him, asking whether she has grounds to come forward. 8 months ago, which was before Danielle, which meant the timeline Margaret had been holding 4 months, the beginnings of what she thought she understood was itself a construction. Partial picture presented to her by a man who had been doing this for longer than the partial picture allowed. She sat with that. She had spent a week learning that the versions of things she had been living in were not the full versions. The relationship she thought she was in, the engagement she thought she understood, the seat on a plane that turned into a lie, that turned into 4 months, that turned into longer than 4 months. Pattern that had been assembling itself in other people's lives while she was making allowances and filing things away and being sensible. She felt something move through her chest. Not grief this time. something harder than grief. The specific anger of a woman who has been patient for too long about the wrong things and has finally run out of patience. "Tell David Park I'll meet with him," she said. Thursday morning, before Sheila's meeting, both in the same morning. Yes. Francis looked at her for a long moment. The 11-year look. "Who are you right now?" "I'm figuring that out," Margaret said. "But she deserves to have someone in her corner who isn't getting paid to be there." Wednesday passed in this specific way, that days pass when you are holding multiple difficult things in your hands and waiting for the moment when you can put them down in the right place. Margaret worked. She answered emails with the particular focused efficiency of someone who has reduced their interior noise to a level where the external tasks can be handled clearly. She did not speak to Richard. She did not read the texts he sent Tuesday night and Wednesday morning, though she could see from the previews that they had moved from the controlled to something more unraveled. She called Linda on Wednesday evening. "Thursday is going to be a complicated day," she said. "How complicated?" "I'm meeting Danielle's attorney in the morning. The union meets at 9. The board chair wants me at 2. She paused. "And somewhere in there I need to figure out what I actually want to say to Danielle herself." "What do you want to say to her?" She thought about that. About the phone call Sunday night. The careful, rehearsed opening and the unsteady breath underneath it. The young woman who had called her, of all people, because she needed someone to know. "I want to tell her that what happened to her is not her fault," Margaret said. "And I want her to hear it from someone who isn't her attorney or her family, and who has no reason to say it except that it's true." Linda was quiet for a moment. "You're doing a lot of hard things this week." "Yes, for other people. Some of it is for me too," Margaret said. "I spent 4 years not doing hard things. I think I'm making up for it." She did not sleep well Wednesday night either, but she had stopped expecting to. Sleep would return when the ground was solid again. For now she moved through the dark hours with the patient wakefulness of someone who has accepted that certain seasons require existing on less. Thursday morning arrived cold and clear. She dressed carefully, not in the soft armor way she used to dress for difficult days, the professional invisibility of someone trying not to be noticed, but in the particular way she was beginning to understand was more honest. Dark suit, the earrings her mother had left her, simple gold, nothing elaborate. The coat she had bought herself 3 winters ago because she loved it and not because it was practical. David Park was already at the coffee shop 3 blocks from the hospital when she arrived at 7:15. He was younger than his voice had suggested, early 40s, careful eyes behind wire-framed glasses, the particular stillness of someone accustomed to sitting with difficult information and not letting it make him careless. They ordered coffee. She did not make small talk, and he seemed to appreciate that. "The former employee's name is Claire Weiss," he said. He placed a manila folder on the table between them, but did not open it yet. She was a junior analyst at Holt Consulting from 2 years ago until 8 months ago, when she resigned under a settlement agreement that included a comprehensive NDA. How comprehensive? Very. He paused. But an NDA that covers settlement terms does not necessarily cover a person's ability to speak to regulators or law enforcement. Ms. Weiss has been advised of the distinction. She's willing to come forward. She's considering it. Danielle's filing changed things for her. Knowing she wasn't alone, he paused. It changes the calculation. Margaret looked at the folder on the table. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing specific. I wanted you to be informed before the HR process at Holt Consulting moved into its next phase. Richard Holt's attorney has been retained. I assume you know this. He called me Monday night. His attorney is good. The strategy is going to be mutual. That what happened with Danielle was mutual. That she was a willing participant who is now characterizing things differently after the relationship ended." He said it without inflection, the flat recitation of a man presenting a known playbook. The pattern Claire Weiss makes that argument significantly harder to sustain. "You're telling me that Danielle needs Claire to come forward. I'm telling you that the strongest protection for Danielle, legally and professionally, is a documented pattern. One account of a relationship characterized as mutual is a difficult case. 2 accounts of a structural pattern is a different kind of case entirely. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, the heat of it solid and real and present. What would help Claire come forward? She said. He looked at her. Knowing that someone with standing in this situation believes her account. Standing, she said. You mean me. You were engaged to Richard Holt for 4 years. If you are willing to speak not in a legal context yet, just to Claire directly, as a person who knows the man and who is not minimizing what she experienced, that is the thing she has said she needs to hear before she decides. Margaret looked at the window. The Columbus morning outside, ordinary people doing ordinary things, the cold October light making everything look slightly more vivid than usual. She thought about the list she had made on Monday sitting at her desk. The specific chronological, factual list of the ways Richard had managed information and removed choices from people who were supposed to have them. She thought about the seat on the plane and the lie to Danielle and the footnote in Appendix C and Harrington's warning about board members with interests and Diane Reston's benefits package and Claire Weiss sitting somewhere in this city, with an NDA and a decision she couldn't make alone. She thought about what she had said to Francis on Tuesday morning. I'm getting better at doing things because they're right instead of because they're safe. I'll talk to her, Margaret said. David Park looked at her. Not with relief. Exactly, he was too careful for relief. But with the specific quality of someone who has brought a hard question to the right person and received the right answer. I'll arrange it, he said. She left the coffee shop at 8:12 and walked the 3 blocks back to the hospital in the cold morning air, her hands in her coat pockets, her breath making small clouds in front of her. She had 45 minutes before Sheila's union meeting. She had the board chair at 2. She had a phone call to make to a woman she had never met, who needed to hear from someone with no professional obligation to tell her the truth. She walked through the hospital's main entrance and through the corridor and Pontus Nurse's Station, where Diane Reston was at the end of a night shift, charting with the focused efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 19 years and did it well. Diane looked up as she passed. They exchanged the small nod of colleagues who see each other daily and don't need much to communicate the acknowledgement. Margaret stopped. Diane, she said. Diane looked up fully. Slightly surprised, they had a cordial professional relationship, warm but not personal. Miss Calloway, I need you to know something, Margaret said. About the Carson proposal, Diane set her pen down. Her face went careful, the way faces go when someone is about to say something that has the texture of importance. I sent the board a memo Monday, Margaret said, about a staffing provision in the proposal. I want to make sure you know it exists and what it means before the board meeting. I'll have Francis send you the relevant section this morning. Diane looked at her, the careful look opening into something more direct. How bad is it? Bad enough that you need to read it yourself and make sure your union rep has seen it. She paused. Which she has. Diane nodded slowly. Something moved through her face, not relief, not yet, but the specific quality of someone who has been carrying a nameless anxiety and has just had it confirmed and named, which was in some ways worse than the anxiety, but in every practical sense, better. Thank you, Diane said, quietly, meaning it. Don't thank me yet, Margaret said. The board meeting is in 15 days. A lot of things are going to happen between now and then. She walked to her office. She sat down. She looked at her desk. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize, which meant David Park had moved quickly. The message said, "This is Claire. David said you'd be willing to talk. I don't know what I'm asking for exactly. I just need to talk to someone who knew him." She looked at that text for a long moment. Someone who knew him. Past tense. Already. She typed back, "I'm available today after 2. Can you do 3 o'clock? The response came in under a minute. Yes. She put the phone down. She straightened the things on her desk. She looked at the wall where she had been looking on Monday, when everything was still being assembled, and she was still trying to understand the shape of what she was standing in. The shape was clearer now. Not fully clear, there were still pieces she didn't have. Things that would come out in HR processes and board meetings and conversations with women she hadn't met yet. But the outline of it was visible. The specific outline of a life that had been organized around sensibleness and accommodation for long enough that The accommodation had become the architecture, and she had mistaken the architecture for herself. She was taking the architecture apart, not quickly, not cleanly, with the specific messiness of something that had been built over years and required years' worth of accumulated reality to be pried loose. But she was doing it. Board memo by union meeting. By meeting with a young woman, she owed an honest conversation. One thing at a time in the order they arrived, without managing the pace to protect anyone's comfort, including her own. At 8:58, she stood up and walked to the conference room, where Sheila Brandt was gathering 23 senior nursing staff for an 8:59 meeting that the CFO did not know was happening, and that was going to change the terms of the next 15 days in ways that Thomas Harrington had not accounted for. She walked through the door. 23 faces turned toward her. Diane Reston in the third row. Terrence Hall near the window. People she had worked alongside for years. People whose names she knew and whose situation she understood and whose contracts were in a footnote in Appendix C, waiting to be ratified into something irreversible. Sheila was at the front. She looked at Margaret as she came in, with the specific look of a woman who was about to do something consequential and wanted to confirm she was not doing it alone. Margaret gave her the smallest nod. Sheila turned to the room. "You all got a message from me last night about an urgent meeting," she said. "I want to explain why you're here, and I want Miss Calloway to explain it with me. It's because she is the reason you have this information right now, and not 6 months from now, when it would be too late." 23 pairs of eyes turned to Margaret. She stood in the front of that room, with her hands still not gripped together, not crossed, just at her sides, present and unarmored, and she thought about Thursday and the plane, and the seat she had walked away from, and what that walk had started. She opened her mouth, and she told them the truth. She told them everything that was in Appendix. See, not the softened version. Not the version that came with qualifiers and careful framing and the bureaucratic cushioning that turned broken promises into operational adjustments. She told them what the reclassification meant in plain numbers: hours reduced, benefits thresholds shifted, coverage eliminated for the people who fell below the new full-time designation. She told them what the footnote said and what the footnote did not say, and why the distance between those two things was the most important thing in the document. The room was very quiet while she talked. Terrence Hall, near the window, had his arms crossed and his jaw set, and the particular stillness of a man who is absorbing something that is making him angrier than he wants to show. Diane Reston had taken out a small notebook and was writing, not looking up, the focused documentation of someone who has decided that what's being said needs to be recorded in their own hand. When Margaret finished, nobody spoke for a moment. Then a woman in the back, Margaret knew her as Patricia Yoon, 21 years in oncology, the kind of nurse who remembered every patient's family member's name, said, "Did Harrington know you were going to send the board memo?" "No," Margaret said. "Is that why he came to your office Monday?" "Yes." Patricia looked at the table, then back up. "What happens if the board votes to proceed with the merger anyway?" It was the right question. The one Margaret had been sitting with since Monday. She did not reach for a comfortable answer. "Then you'll have had the information before the vote," she said. "And the board will have made their decision, knowing that the people in this room knew what they were deciding, which is different from making it in the dark." She paused. "It doesn't guarantee the outcome you want, but it changes the nature of the fight." Sheila stepped forward. "The union is filing a formal objection to the staffing provision before Thursday is out. That objection goes into the record. When the board meets, they meet with a documented union objection attached to the proposal." She looked around the room. "Which means if they vote to proceed with Appendix C intact, they do it on the record, in front of that documentation, and every one of them owns that vote by name." Terrence uncrossed his arms. He looked at Margaret. "Why did you do this?" She looked back at him. "Because I've been in this building for 23 years, and I know what your situations are. And because someone recently showed me, very clearly, what it costs to keep things in the wrong compartment for too long." She paused. "I should have found that footnote 6 weeks ago. I didn't. I'm finding it now." Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Diane Reston looked up from her notebook. "Thank you," she said. The same 2 words as Monday morning, but different now. Heavier. The thank you of a woman who understands the specific cost of what she's being thanked for. The meeting ended at 9:47. Margaret walked back to her office through corridors that felt slightly different than they had on Monday, not because they had changed, but because something in how she was moving through them had. She was not managing herself in them, the way she usually managed herself. She was just walking. Frances was at her desk when she arrived. Frances looked up and said nothing, which was how Margaret knew the meeting had gone, the way Frances had hoped it would go. David Park confirmed 3 o'clock, Frances said. And he said Claire Weiss agreed to meet at Mercy's family consultation room. She didn't want to be somewhere public. That's fine, Margaret said. Book the room. Already done. Frances paused. Harrington sent you an email 20 minutes ago. I'll read it. You should read it now. She sat at her desk and opened it. The email was 4 paragraphs. The language was professional and precise, and beneath the professionalism was the specific cold temperature of a man who had decided that the conversation he'd had on Monday had not gone the way he needed it to go and was now communicating through formal channels instead. He referenced her memo. He referenced the appropriate review process for merger-related communications. He referenced a conversation he had had with the board chair that morning, which meant he had called the board chair before 8, which meant he had been awake, and working this before she had sat down Sheila, which meant he had moved first. At the bottom, in language that was technically neutral and practically unmistakable, he noted that questions had been raised about the appropriateness of Margaret's unilateral communication with board members on a matter still under deliberation, and that the board chair had requested a preliminary conversation before the scheduled 2 o'clock meeting. Preliminary conversation. Before the meeting, which meant Harrington had requested a pre-meeting to set the terms before she arrived at her own meeting. She read the email twice. She closed it. She opened a new email and she wrote to the board chair directly. She said she was available at 2 o'clock as scheduled and looked forward to the conversation. She did not reference Harrington's email. She did not acknowledge the preliminary conversation request. She copied Frances and nobody else. Then she sent it and turned to the window. The morning was still cold and clear outside. She thought about the seat on the plane, about how she had stood at the gate with her carry-on in her hand and her heart doing the wrong fuel thing, and how she had turned around and walked up the jet bridge without knowing exactly what she was starting. She had thought she was walking away from an uncomfortable morning. She had been walking into the beginning of a complete reorganization of the architecture of her life, one piece at a time, each piece heavier than the last, and none of them optional. She was tired. She acknowledged that plainly, in the same way she acknowledged facts that needed to be acknowledged in order to be managed. She was tired in the way that a week of difficult things makes a person tired, not the shallow tired of poor sleep, but the deeper tired of having used herself fully, of having operated at a register she was not accustomed to maintaining for this many consecutive days. She was also, underneath the tired, something else. She sat with the something else for a moment, tried to name it accurately rather than reaching for the nearest available word. It was not confidence, exactly. Not the performed confidence she had once relied on in difficult meetings, the professional composure she had trained into herself over 23 years. This was different, less constructed, more like the feeling of a person who has spent a long time carrying a weight they were told was theirs to carry, and has finally, after setting it down, discovered what their actual spine feels like. Her phone buzzed. A text from Richard. She looked at it. My attorney wants to schedule a call with you about the house. This week, if possible. She stared at that text for a long moment. The house, the logistics. The practical reality of unwinding a 4-year shared life, which did not pause for union meetings or board chair emails or women named Claire Weiss, who needed to hear the truth from someone with no professional obligation to tell it. She texted back, Friday afternoon works. Have him call me directly. She put the phone away. At 11:30, Frances knocked and came in. The board chair's assistant called, she said. No pre-meeting. 2 o'clock as scheduled. Margaret looked at her. Harrington? My guess is the board chair read your direct email and decided she didn't need him to pre-frame her conversation with you. Frances allowed herself a small smile, brief, controlled, the smile of a woman who has been watching institutional politics for a long time and still finds it satisfying when the better instinct wins. Eleanor Marsh is not a woman who likes being managed. Eleanor Marsh. The board chair had been at Mercy General for 6 years, had come from a background in public health administration, and had the specific reputation of a person who asked the question underneath the question. Margaret had always respected her without knowing her well. She was about to know her better. She ate lunch at her desk. A sandwich Frances had brought without being asked, which was the kind of thing Frances did, the small practical acts that expressed what she did not often say directly. Margaret ate it and answered emails, and let the morning settle into the particular contained quiet of a day that was holding its breath between the things that had already happened and the things that hadn't happened yet. At 2 o'clock, she walked to the board chair's office on the 3rd floor. Eleanor Marsh was 64. She had white hair she did not apologize for, and the compact efficiency of a woman who had been in rooms like this for decades and had long since stopped performing anything for them. She stood when Margaret came in, not out of deference, but because she was already standing at the window when Margaret arrived, and simply turned rather than sitting in order to manage the power of the position. She gestured to the chairs. They both sat. The memo, Eleanor said. Not preamble, not small talk. The board chair did not appear to use small talk. Yes, Margaret said. You sent it without going through Harrington's review process. The review process is not required for direct board communications from senior administration, Margaret said. The governance documents before I sent it. I know you did, Eleanor said. That's why I didn't take the pre-meeting Thomas wanted. She looked at Margaret with the direct, unvarnished attention of someone who was deciding something. What's in Appendix C, you're certain? I spent 2 hours with the document Monday afternoon. I have 23 years of reading nursing contract structures in this building. I'm certain. Thomas says it's preliminary. It's in Appendix C of a board document going to vote in 15 days, Margaret said. If it's preliminary, it should be clearly marked as such, removed from the appendix, and not included in any document a board member is expected to act on. Preliminary options don't belong in documents that are one vote away from implementation. Eleanor looked at the window, then back at Margaret. The Carson merger has significant support on this board. I'm aware. There are board members who are going to read your memo as an act of sabotage. I read it as my job, Margaret said. If protecting the staff of this hospital from a benefits reclassification they weren't told about reads as sabotage, that's a problem with how some board members understand the purpose of this administration. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She had the particular quality of stillness that belonged to people who had learned to let silences do their work before filling them. The union filed an objection this morning, she said. Yes, you spoke to Sheila Brandt before the filing. I spoke to Sheila Brandt because she needed access to the same document the board has. Margaret held Eleanor's gaze. I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm not asking you to. Eleanor leaned back slightly. I'm trying to understand the sequence of your decisions. The sequence is straightforward. I read the document. I found the footnote. I sent the memo. I met with the union. Now I'm here, and the personal situation the week you've had. Eleanor's voice did not change in tone. But the sentence changed the conversation. Thomas mentioned it. Margaret felt the specific temperature drop of a woman whose personal life has been introduced into a professional conversation by a man who decided it was useful. She breathed through it. Thomas mentioned it to undermine the credibility of my judgment, she said, which is a tactic I recognize. My personal situation has no relevance to what's in Appendix C. No, Eleanor said. It doesn't. A pause. I'm asking because I want to know if you're all right. Not because I think it changes anything about the memo. But because you walked in here on Monday, after canceling a week of approved vacation, you sent a memo that you knew was going to start a political fight, and you look like someone who has been awake for 4 days. She looked at her with the level attention of someone asking an actual question. Are you all right? Margaret looked at the board chair. She had not expected that question in that room. She had been prepared for the institutional version of this conversation, the ones about process and appropriateness, and board dynamics and Harrington's feelings. She had not been prepared for someone to simply ask. "I'm functional," she said, which was honest. "That's not the same thing as all right." "No," Margaret agreed. "It's not," Eleanor nodded. "Once. The board meets in 15 days. I'm going to read Appendix C tonight with the specificity you're describing. I'm going to ask the Carson team to clarify the status of the staffing provisions in writing before the vote." She paused. "I can't promise you how the vote goes. I can promise you that it won't go in the dark." "That's all I ask for," Margaret said. She left at 2:47 and walked to the family consultation room on the second floor, where Frances had confirmed Claire Weiss was waiting. She stood outside the door for a moment, not because she was afraid of what was behind it, but because she wanted to be clear in herself about what she was walking in to do and what she was not. She was not walking in as Richard's former fiancé, looking for information. She was not walking in as a witness to an HR proceeding or a participant in a legal strategy. She was walking in as a woman who had spent a week learning that staying quiet about the truth of difficult things had costs that accumulated until they became catastrophic. She opened the door. Claire Weiss was 27. She had dark hair and the particular quality of stillness that Margaret recognized as the stillness of someone who has been holding themselves very carefully for a long time and has not yet decided whether the person across from them is safe enough to stop. She was sitting with her hands folded in her lap and her back up straight, and she looked at Margaret with eyes that were doing the comprehensive fast assessment of someone who had learned to read rooms quickly out of necessity. She did not across from her. She did not extend her hand. It felt like the wrong gesture for the specific texture of what this room contained, but she held the younger woman's gaze directly. "I'm Margaret," she said. "I know," Claire said. "David told you about me. He told me you ended your engagement. He told me you were willing to talk." She paused. Her voice was careful, controlled in the way that things are controlled when the control is the only thing keeping them from becoming something else. "He didn't tell me what to expect from you." "I don't have an agenda," Margaret said. "I'm not here because David Park needs something from you. I'm here because I was with Richard for 4 years, and I want you to know that I believe what you've said." Claire looked at her, the careful look opening slightly at the edges, like a door with its lock turned but not yet pushed. "You don't know what I've said," Claire said. "I know enough," Margaret said. "I know that 8 months ago you left a job you'd worked hard to get, under a settlement agreement, with terms you couldn't speak about. And I know that when Danielle filed her complaint, you reached out to David, because you needed to know whether coming forward was possible." She paused. "I also know that the reason you've been sitting with that decision for days is that coming forward means breaking the silence you were paid to keep, in a situation where the person with the power is not you." Claire's jaw tightened. She looked at the table for a moment. "He told me it was fine too," she said, quietly, the way something is said when it has been held in for a long time and comes out smaller than expected. "He told me I was overthinking it, that I was reading into things. That what was happening was he made me feel like I was the one who had created the situation." She looked up, and I believed him for longer than I should have, because he was my supervisor, and he had been doing this for a long time, and I was 25, and I thought. She stopped. "I thought if he said it was fine, maybe it was fine." Margaret did not fill the silence. She let it be what it was. "It wasn't fine," Claire said. "No," Margaret said. "It wasn't. How did you not know?" She said it without accusation. The genuine, searching question of someone who needed to understand the full picture. "You were with him for 4 years. You were going to marry him. How did you not—" "I made allowances," Margaret said. "I took things individually instead of looking at the pattern. I was sensible about things that deserved a different response." She paused. "I also didn't have access to the information you're sitting on right now." He was very good at keeping things in separate compartments. "He kept me in a compartment." "Yes, and Danielle." "Yes, and you." "Me too," Margaret said, in a different way. "But yes." Claire looked at her hands. She turned them over in her lap, palms up then back down. The gesture of someone doing something unconscious with her body while her mind worked. If I break the NDA she started, you should talk to David about the legal dimensions, Margaret said. That's his area, not mine. She paused. What I can tell you is this: I spent 4 years managing the discomfort of things I noticed and filed away, because looking at them directly meant changing something I didn't want to change. And I'm sitting here right now because the cost of that management finally became larger than the cost of looking directly. She looked at Claire steadily. That's a calculation you have to make for yourself. But I want you to know that the thing you're afraid of losing by coming forward, the safety, the quiet, the containment of it being over and done, that thing is already gone. You've already been carrying this for 8 months. You're already paying for it. Claire's eyes filled. She did not look away. She held Margaret's gaze with the particular, effortful steadiness of someone who has decided that this moment requires looking at rather than looking away from. He really doesn't think he did anything wrong, Claire said. Does he? It was not quite a question. No, Margaret said. I don't think he does. I think he has told himself a very complete story in which everything husband has an explanation that centers his own comfort. She paused. That's not your problem to solve. That's his. Your only job is to decide what's true for you. Claire wiped her eyes once with the back of her hand. A quick, almost impatient gesture, the gesture of someone who is not comfortable being seen crying and is ending it as fast as possible. Then she straightened. I'll talk to David, she said. Good, Margaret said. She stood. Claire stood too, and for a moment they were simply two women in a small consultation room at the end of an October Thursday. And the distance between them was the distance of a generation and a very shared experience and the particular complicated solidarity of people who have been in the same architecture without knowing it. Margaret extended her hand. Claire took it. Her grip was firm and slightly cold and entirely present. Thank you, Claire said. You did the hard part yourself, Margaret said. You picked up the phone. She left the consultation room at 3:41. She walked down the corridor and out through the main entrance into the late afternoon. The cold had deepened since morning. The light was the particular gold-going amber of October at 4 o'clock, the light that made everything look simultaneously more beautiful and more fragile than it actually was. She stood on the steps of Mercy General and breathed. The week arrived in her all at once, not as a wave of emotion exactly, but as a physical reckoning. Her feet were tired. Her shoulders carried the specific tension of 7 days of holding herself upright through things that required being upright. Her chest had the particular ache of someone who has used the full range of what they were capable of and is now at the edge of it. She had not cried. She noted this without judgment. The crying was there, she could feel it, waiting in the specific place where grief waited in her, the place behind her sternum, where things went when they were too large to process in real time. It would come. She knew it would come, probably on a Saturday morning in November, when there was nothing required of her, and the absence of requirement would let the thing that had been waiting in the compartment finally arrive. She would let it when it came. For now she stood on the hospital steps, in the October, cold and breathed. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Linda, how are you doing today, specifically? She smiled. The Linda specificity. Not how are you, which could be answered with fine, but how are you today specifically, which required actual content. She typed back, tired, functional. I talked to Claire Weiss. Linda, how did that go? She's going to come forward. I think. Because of you. Margaret looked at that for a moment. Because of herself, she typed back. I just showed up. She put the phone in her pocket and walked to her car. The next 2 weeks moved with the particular grinding pace of institutional processes doing what they were designed to do. The board meeting arrived on Friday afternoon in the first week of November. Margaret sat in the third-row seat she had occupied at every board meeting for 11 years, with the printed copy of her memo and Appendix C beside her and Frances, 2 seats to her left. Eleanor Marsh ran the meeting with the same level, unadorned competence she brought to everything. The Carson team presented. The financial projections were displayed. The strategic rationale was laid out in the language of growth and efficiency and regional positioning. Then Eleanor asked the Carson representative to address the staffing provisions in Appendix C directly. The representative, a man in his 40s, who had the smooth, assembled quality of someone who had given this presentation many times and was accustomed to it being received without friction, paused, recalibrated. He had been told, evidently, that the question was coming, but the telling and the hearing it asked in the room were different experiences. He said the reclassification was one option. Eleanor said, "Is it currently included in the implementation plan?" He said, "In a preliminary capacity." Eleanor said, "Then it needs to be removed from the implementation plan before this board votes. We will not vote on a proposal that includes, even preliminarily, a staffing provision that has not been reviewed by legal, disclosed to the affected staff, and cleared through the appropriate HR channels." She looked at him with the flat, comprehensive attention of a woman who was not performing firmness but simply being it. The merger has merit. Appendix C, as written, does not. Those are separable. Separate them. Thomas Harrington, 3 seats to Margaret's right, was looking at the table with the particular expression of a man who had run the wrong play and knew it. The board voted to table the Carson proposal, pending revision of the staffing provisions. It was not a vote against the merger. It was a vote that said the merger could not proceed on terms that had been buried in a footnote. The distinction mattered. It was the distinction Margaret had been trying to produce since Monday. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the specific, quieter thing that comes after you've done the right thing, and the right thing has been heard, which was different from winning and more durable. Frances leaned over after the vote and said, "Diane Reston is going to cry when she hears." "Don't tell her that," Margaret said. "Tell her the work isn't done. Tell her the revision process is going to take months, and she needs to be paying attention to every draft." "I know," Frances said, "but she's still going to cry." Richard's attorney and hers spent 10 days sorting out the house. It was in the end not complicated. The house was hers. The things they had bought together were divided with the practiced efficiencies of 2 attorneys who had done this before and did not require their clients to be in the same room. Richard kept the furniture from his study. She kept the Japanese maple, which had never been his to begin with. He called her once during those 10 days. She answered. "Danielle's complaint," he said. His voice had the flat, used quality of someone who has been through several days of difficult conversations and has arrived at a version of himself that is stripped of most of its usual architecture. "And Claire." "Yes," she said. He stopped. She heard him breathing. "I told myself it was fine. Both times. I genuinely told myself." "I know," she said. "That's the problem, Richard. Not that you lied to me about it. That you told yourself a story that made it fine, and then you lived inside that story." She paused. "That's not something I can fix, and it's not something an HR process fixes. It's something you have to decide to look at." He was quiet. "Are you going to?" she said, a long silence. "I don't know," he said. And it was the first thing he had said to her in 10 days that sounded like the full truth. "Okay," she said. She did not tell him to try or not to try. She did not manage his path forward. She said okay, in the way you say okay, when a fact has been stated and acknowledged, and there is nothing more useful to add, and she let the conversation end. The HR process at Holt Consulting moved through its stages. Claire Weiss came forward. With 2 accounts and a documented pattern, the process moved differently than it would have moved with 1. Richard's attorney worked hard. The outcome was not public. Margaret was not privy to the specific terms, and she did not seek to be, but Danielle called her in the 3rd week of November, with a voice that had a different quality than either of their previous conversations. The rehearsed quality was gone. The unsteady breath underneath it was gone. She sounded like a person who had set something down. "It's done," Danielle said. "I know," Margaret said. "Are you okay?" A pause. "I think I will be." Another pause. "I know I complicated things for you. With the engagement and—" "Danielle." Margaret kept her voice even. "You called me on a Sunday night when you could have stayed quiet and let everything proceed on the terms that were easiest for you. That's not a complication. That's a courage I don't think you've given yourself credit for." Silence on Danielle's end. The silence of someone receiving something they had not expected to receive. "I didn't do it for the right reasons. At first," Danielle said. "I called you because I felt guilty, not because I was trying to be brave." Most brave things start as something else, Margaret said. The bravery is what it becomes in the doing. She did cry on a Saturday morning in November. She had known it was coming. She made coffee. She sat in the armchair that had been her mother's and she let it come. Not dramatically, she was not a dramatic crier, never had been, but with the particular thoroughness of someone releasing something that had been held in long enough to need releasing. She cried for the relationship she had believed in and the version of herself she had been inside it. She cried for 4 years of allowances that had cost her in ways she was still accounting for. She cried for the wedding that wasn't going to happen and the future she had planned around a person she had not fully seen. She did not cry for Richard. She cried for herself, which was different and more useful and long overdue. When she was done, she washed her face. She drank her coffee. She looked at the Japanese maple through the front window, which had lost most of its leaves by now, and stood with the particular bare, unashamed quality of a tree that had put its roots down in the ground and was waiting without apology for what came next. She called Linda. "I cried this morning," she said. "Good," Linda said. "How do you feel?" She thought about that. The honest inventory. Tired, still, but a different kind of tired. The tired of something finished rather than something ongoing. Light in a way she hadn't expected, or maybe had expected but hadn't trusted herself to count on until it actually arrived. And underneath all of it, something she had not felt in years. The specific unperformed quality of a woman standing on ground that was actually hers. "I feel like myself," she said. "Yes," Linda said. "That sounds right." The Carson merger revision process took 4 months. Margaret was involved in every draft. The nursing reclassification provision was removed entirely from the implementation plan in the second draft and did not reappear. The merger ultimately proceeded in the spring with a staffing structure that had been reviewed by legal, disclosed to the affected employees, and cleared through HR, not because Thomas Harrington had decided to be a better man, but because Eleanor Marsh had decided that her board was not going to vote on footnotes and that this decision had weight. Diane Reston came to Margaret's office in April with 2 cups of coffee. She set one on the desk and held the other, and looked at Margaret with the specific look of a person who has been carrying a gratitude for a long time and has decided it needs to be delivered in person. "My husband got a job in March," she said. "Teaching. It's not the same money, but it's something." She paused. "I kept my benefits." "I know," Margaret said. "It mattered," Diane said. "I know that too." Diane nodded. She started to say something else, and then didn't, because what she had said was sufficient, and she knew it, and she left without ceremony, which was the right way to leave. Frances appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later and said, "You know." She cried in the elevator. "You don't know that. Terrence texted me." Margaret looked at the window. The Columbus April outside was doing the thing April did in Ohio, attempting optimism against long odds, the first real warmth of the year, still uncertain about its own authority. Trees beginning, the particular tentative green of things that had been wading through a long winter and were now, cautiously, deciding it was safe. She had made no plans, in the months since October, that extended past what was immediately in front of her. She had fixed things that needed fixing. She had done her job with the focused present tense competence that the job required. She had spent Saturday mornings alone in the house that was entirely hers again, relearning the specific texture of a life that did not need to accommodate itself around someone else's architecture. She had not been lonely. She had been, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely alone, which was different from lonely. The way silence was different from emptiness. She had sat in the quiet of her own house and listened to what was there. When she stopped filling the space with management and allowances and the low-grade constant effort of holding a version of herself in place that was not entirely real. What was there was mostly herself, which was sufficient. Which was, she discovered incrementally over those months. More than sufficient, it was the Muslims while she was busy standing on something else's. She was not done. She understood that clearly. Done was not a thing that arrived and stayed. She was going to have days that were harder than this April morning, and weeks that required more of her than she thought she had. The Carson process would produce new problems. The hospital would present new situations where the sensible choice and the right choice were not the same, and she would have to make the right one again, at a cost, in the specific, unglamorous way that right choices required. She was going to have to learn, still, what the next version of her life looked like, not the life planned around a relationship that had been a careful construction, but the life that was actually hers. The one she had been building for 23 years, before she let someone else's architecture lean against it. She did not know yet what that looked like in its entirety. She knew it included her office, and Diane Reston's coffee, and Francis appearing in doorways, and the Japanese maple doing its October thing every year without asking anyone's permission. She knew it included Linda's precise practical love, and Donna's kitchen table honesty, and the guest room in Cincinnati with the paperback and the dark chocolate almonds on the nightstand. She knew it included, somewhere, the woman she had been becoming since the moment she stood up on a jet bridge with a carry-on in her hand, and her heart running on the wrong fuel, and turned around and walked away from the seat she had been told to be content with. She looked at the April window. She picked up her coffee. She went back to work, not because work was the whole of it, but because she was a person who showed up, who did the thing that needed doing, who held the building together and meant it. Because 23 years of that was not a consolation prize for a life that had failed to become something else. It was the actual thing, the real thing, the work that was hers, in a way that nothing borrowed or managed or carefully constructed around another person's comfort had ever been. The coffee was good. The April light was coming through the window at the angle it came through at this hour, the specific angle that had been coming through this particular window at this particular hour for 23 years, indifferent and reliable. And there, Margaret Calloway sat in her office and let the morning be what it was. It was enough. It was in fact more than enough. It was hers.